He had written to her every single week for 7 years, 364 letters sent into silence, and she had kept every one. A man doesn't collapse on a train platform in front of strangers. A man doesn't press his forehead to a woman's shoulder and come apart like wet paper. That was what Eli Crawford had always believed right up until the September afternoon when Eleanor Voss stepped off the 2 o'clock train from Philadelphia, and every rule he'd ever made for himself dissolved in the steam and noise of the Laramie station. Before we continue, subscribe to this channel and stay with us until the very end. Drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. March 1885, 7 years earlier. The wind was trying to kill something that night. It came off the high plains in long, furious waves, hammering the bunkhouse walls hard enough to make the lantern flame tremble. Outside, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sundown, and the cattle were lowing somewhere in the dark, that low, mournful sound they made when the cold got serious. Eli Crawford sat on the edge of his bunk and with a sheet of paper on a board across his knees, and he had been staring at the blank page for 20 minutes without writing a single word. He was 18 years old, and he did not entirely understand why he was doing this. 3 weeks earlier, a box of old newspapers had arrived at the Harmon Ranch General Supply, someone's discarded freight mixed up with the saddle soap and the salt blocks. Eli had read every page of every paper twice over the course of 2 weeks, because reading material was not a thing a man came by easily in eastern Wyoming in 1885, and because the alternative was listening to Doyle Marsh talk about his hemorrhoids for the third night running. It was in the Philadelphia Inquirer, a church correspondence column faded and water-stained at the edges, that he found it. Miss Eleanor Voss, 22, school teacher, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, seeking correspondence with individuals of good character and sincere intent. Interests include literature, natural history, and music. Responds to all letters received. He didn't know what made him cut it out. He folded it twice and put it in his boot, and for 3 days he carried it around and didn't do anything about it. Then on Sunday night, when the bunkhouse was particularly loud and the walls felt like they were pressing in, he asked the ranch foreman for a sheet of paper and started writing. Dear Miss Voss, my name is Eli Crawford. I am 18 years old and I work cattle on the Harmon Ranch in Wyoming Territory. I found your name in a newspaper someone left at the supply depot, and I don't know why I am writing, except that tonight the wind is very loud and the bunkhouse smells like tobacco and wet wool, and I am tired of talking to men who smell like horses. I have never been to Philadelphia. I have never been anywhere except here. I don't know anything about literature or music. I know how to rope a steer and mend a fence line and tell weather by the way a horse holds its ears. I don't expect you to write back. I just thought maybe somewhere in the world there is a person who might want to know that tonight in Wyoming the stars are so bright they look like holes punched through a black cloth. Respectfully, Eli Crawford. He sealed it before he could think too hard about it. Posted it the next morning when he rode into Cheyenne for supplies. Came back to the ranch and told himself he wouldn't think about it again. He thought about it every day for 6 weeks. No reply came. 3 months passed. Spring arrived with mud and newborn calves and the kind of work that left a man too tired to do anything except sleep. Eli branded cattle and mended fence line and hauled water and slept like the dead. And on Sunday nights, he wrote another letter. Dear Miss Voss, I don't know if my first letter reached you. The mail out here is unreliable. If you did receive it and decided not to answer, I understand completely. I am writing again anyway because today something happened that I thought you might want to hear about. There was a mare on this ranch that foaled last night. The colt came out wrong tangled and everyone said it was dead, but it wasn't. It stood up on shaking legs in about 10 minutes and lived. The boss said that's how it is out here. Most things try to kill you, and the ones that survive are tougher for it. I have been thinking about that all day, about how hard things are and how we keep going anyway. I hope you are well. Eli Crawford. He posted that one too, and the next one, and the one after that. By the time 6 months had passed, Doyle Marsh had noticed. You're at it again. Doyle said it from across the room without looking up from his cards. The way he said everything, like he was too tired to be fully invested in any conversation, but felt compelled to participate anyway. Wrote to your sweetheart. Don't have a sweetheart, Eli said. Then who the hell you writing to every Sunday like it's church? Someone I haven't met yet. The 3 other men at the card table looked up at that. Doyle set down his hand and turned around on his stool to get a proper look at the 18-year-old sitting on his bunk with ink on his fingers. You're writing to a woman you never met, Doyle said. That's right. And she writes back, Eli kept his eyes on the paper. Not yet. The silence that followed was the particular kind that meant the room had collectively decided a man was cracked. Doyle turned back to his cards with the kind of slow deliberation that communicated profound skepticism. One of the younger hands, a boy named Roof, who'd only been at the ranch a month, gave a short, unkind laugh. That's the saddest damn thing, Roof said. Writing letters to a woman who doesn't answer. Eli finished the line he was writing before he looked up. When he did, he looked at Roof for a long moment without expression. You ever write a letter to anyone, he asked. Roof blinked. No. Then you don't know what it is, Eli said and went back to the page. The room went quiet. Doyle grunted something that might have been agreement, and the card game resumed, and Eli wrote until the lantern started to gutter. And when he was done, he folded the letter and felt for reasons he could not have explained less alone than he had an hour before. By the end of year 1, he had sent 43 letters. By the end of year 2, he had stopped counting. Something changed in him during that second year, a gradual, almost unnoticed shift in his relationship to the silence on the other end. In the beginning, every week without a reply had felt like a small failure, a reminder that he was reaching into empty air. By month 14 or 15, that feeling had faded to something quieter. He wrote because it had become part of him. Because Sunday without a letter felt wrong in the same way a meal without salt felt wrong, technically fine, but missing something essential. He wrote about the ranch and the seasons. He wrote about a blizzard in January that lasted 9 days and cost the operation 40 head of cattle. He wrote about the sound of the plains at 3 in the morning when the wind dropped and the silence was so total it felt almost hostile. He started using her first name somewhere in the middle of year 2, not boldly, not as a statement, but the way you start calling a familiar road by its informal name instead of the official one. Dear Eleanor. He wrote about his mother who had died of fever when he was 12, about his father who had left before he was old enough to remember a face, about his younger sister Clara, who lived now with relatives in Missouri and wrote him dutiful letters twice a year that always contained more news about other people than about herself. He wrote about the things he thought about late at night, whether a person could be good without anyone teaching them how, whether loneliness was something you were born with or something that accumulated, whether the life he was living was the one he was supposed to have or just the one he'd ended up in by default. He turned 20 in February of year 3. The boss gave him a bottle of rye and told him he was a man now. Dear Eleanor, I turned 20 today. I drank some of the whiskey and then went outside and sat on the fence for a long time thinking about what it means. My father left when I was a baby. My mother died when I was 12. My sister went to Missouri. I stayed here because there was nowhere else to go. I have been a man in the practical sense since I was 12 years old. I don't know what it means to become one. I think about you sometimes. I wonder if you are someone who thinks about things like this. What it means to be alive, what we owe each other, what makes a life count for something. I hope you are. Yours, Eli. He was 21 when the worst winter of his life arrived. It came early and hard, and without mercy, a blizzard in November that buried the range under 3 feet of snow and didn't stop for 11 days. When the first storm ended, another came directly behind it. The temperature dropped to 30 below. Cattle froze where they stood in the fields. Eli found them in the morning with their eyes still open, locked rigid in the postures of their last moments. 3 hands quit and rode south within the first week. 2 others refused to go out after dark. Eli stayed. He worked 18-hour days longer, sometimes digging livestock out of drifts, carrying water to the animals that were still alive, burning carcasses to keep disease from spreading. His hands cracked open from the cold and the work and didn't heal because there was no time to let them. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His face took on the weathered, hollowed look of a man 10 years older. Every Sunday, without exception, he wrote, Dear Eleanor, we lost 30 head last week. The temperature hasn't been above 0 in 18 days. I don't know if we're going to make it through this winter, I mean the ranch, but also I mean me. Not because I'm thinking of giving up, but because the cold this year is not like other cold. It has a personality. It wants something. My hands are bleeding as I write this. I'm not telling you that so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you're the only person I talk to honestly, and the honest thing is that tonight I am very tired and not entirely sure what I'm doing. I hope you are warm. I hope someone is taking care of you the way I would if I could. Eli. Spring came eventually. It always did. The ranch recovered. Eli did not recover entirely, not from the winter and not from something else, something harder to name. Standing at a gravesite in April for old Doyle Marsh, who'd had a heart attack during spring branding, Eli realized that he had known the man for 4 years and never once had a real conversation with him. Never asked about his past, his family, what he'd wanted his life to be. They had worked side by side through seasons and storms and disasters, and now Doyle was in the ground, and Eli didn't know a single important thing about him. He stood at the grave for a long time after the others went back to the bunkhouse. Dear Eleanor, a man died today. I worked beside him for 4 years. I didn't like him much, and I don't think he liked me. But standing at his grave, I realized I had never asked him a single real question about his life. I don't want to die like that. Unknown. Unremembered. Is that why I write to you? Because I'm afraid of disappearing without leaving any proof that I was here. I don't know. All I know is that these letters make me feel less like I'm vanishing. Thank you for that. Even if you never read this. Even if you threw the first one away and never thought of it again. Yours, Eli. In year 5, the boss offered him the foreman position. Eli took it without hesitation. More money, more responsibility. A small cabin of his own at the edge of the property, the first private space he'd had since he was a child. The cabin had one room, the cast iron stove, a bed frame with a real mattress, and a single window that looked east toward the mountains. The first thing he built was a shelf. The second thing he did was line up every letter he'd written, over 200 of them, bundled in groups by year, and stand back and look at them. 5 years of Sundays. 5 years of reaching into nothing. What am I doing? He said out loud. The cabin didn't answer. He wrote another letter anyway. Year 6 arrived, and with it the boss's niece. Her name was Iris Harmon. She came from Denver for the summer, 25 years old, capable and direct, with an easy laugh and no particular patience for men who wasted her time. She noticed Eli within the first week, started finding reasons to be near the corrals when he was working, brought food to the hands at noon, and always made sure she sat near him. The boss pulled Eli aside in late July. Iris likes you, he said. I know. She's a good woman, comes from good people. You could do a lot worse. Eli nodded slowly. Yes, sir. So, I'm not interested, sir. The boss frowned. There's someone else. Eli was quiet for a moment. There's someone I've been writing to for almost 6 years. A woman. Yes, sir. She nearby. Philadelphia. The boss looked at him for a long moment. You ever met her? No, sir. Another silence. That, the boss said finally, is the most foolish thing I have heard in 30 years of ranching. Yes, sir, probably is. Iris left in August without saying goodbye. That night, Eli sat in his cabin and wrote, Dear Eleanor, a woman was interested in me this summer. She was kind and pretty and available. Any sensible man would have pursued her. I didn't, because even though I have never met you, even though I do not know if you are married or moved or not, who I've imagined, I cannot picture my life belonging to someone else. Does that make me a fool? Probably. But I would rather be a fool who is honest than a sensible man who settles. I hope you understand. Somehow I think you do. Forever yours, Eli. And then year 7 came. It came quietly, the way the most significant years do. Just another winter. Just another spring. Just another cycle of work and silence and letters into the dark. But Eli felt it from the beginning. Something different in the air, the way you feel a storm before the clouds arrive. A sense that something was ending. He turned 25 in February. The new hands called him sir without prompting. His face in the mirror was a man's face, weathered still, with lines around the eyes that weren't there 2 years ago. 6 years of Wyoming winters had aged him a decade in the right direction. In early March, he sat at his table one Sunday night and held a fresh sheet of paper for a long time without writing. He had written over 300 letters, 300 Sundays, 300 times reaching out into silence and getting silence back. He picked up the pen. Dear Eleanor, this is my last letter to you. Not because I'm angry, not because I've stopped believing you exist somewhere in the world, but because 7 years is long enough to love someone from a distance, and I have other living left to do. I want you to know something before I stop. These years weren't wasted. Every letter I wrote made me more honest, more patient, more willing to look at hard things without flinching. You've been my companion through every hard winter and every empty night, and that is real as anything I've ever had. I hope your life is everything you dreamed. I hope you are warm and loved and making something with your hands that matters. Goodbye, Eleanor. With all the love I have, Eli Crawford. He sealed it, rode to town the next morning, and stood in front of the post office for 10 minutes. Then he went inside and mailed it and rode back to the ranch, feeling hollowed out and oddly free at the same time. That was March 9th, 1885. On March 23rd, 14 days later, the boss's son found him mending fence in the north pasture and rode up with a letter. "Mail for you, Crawford." Eli took it without looking. Probably a seed catalog. He shoved it in his jacket pocket and kept working. It wasn't until he was back in the cabin that evening, boots off stove, lit a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow, that he pulled it out. His heart stopped. The handwriting was not anything he recognized. Delicate, feminine, careful, like someone who had thought about every letter before she wrote it. The return address said Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His hands started shaking. He sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope for a full 5 minutes before he could make himself open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No preamble, no date, just, "Eli, I am still here. I have read every letter, every single one. I will explain everything. I am coming in September. Forgive me. Eleanor." The letter fell out of his hands. Eli stood up, sat down, stood up again. The cabin felt like it had shifted on its foundation, like the floor was the same floor it had always been, but the room was somehow tilted, and he was the only thing in it that hadn't found its footing yet. She was real. She had read them. All of them. She was coming. He walked outside into the cold March air and pressed his forehead against the fence post and stood there for a long time, breathing carefully, feeling something huge and structural shifting inside his chest, something he had braced against for so long that letting it go was almost more than he could manage. The boss found him an hour later, still at the fence, the letter crushed in one fist. "Crawford." The older man studied him the way he studied weather, with calm, professional attention. "You sick?" Eli held up the letter. The boss unfolded it, read it once, folded it carefully back along the original creases, and handed it back. "Well," he said. "She's coming," Eli said, "in September. That's 6 months. I know. What are you going to do?" Eli looked at the cabin, then at the land, the endless, open, brutal land that had been his whole world for 7 years. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm going to figure it out fast." The boss put a hand on his shoulder briefly, the way men did when they meant more than they were willing to say. "Good," he said, and walked back to the main house. Eli stood alone in the cold for a long time after that. Then he went inside, sat at his table, and tried to write back. He started 17 different letters, crossed out every one. What did you say to a woman who already knew everything about you? Every fear, every failure, every longing. He'd never said aloud to another living soul. Finally, after 2 hours, he wrote, "Eleanor, I don't know what to say except thank you, and I'm terrified, and I will be waiting. Eli." He posted it the next morning. Then he rode back to the ranch and started building. Within a week, the ranch hands knew something had happened. They didn't know the details. Eli had not told anyone about the letter, but they knew him well enough to read the change. He smiled at breakfast, not the tight, barely there expression he sometimes produced when something was mildly amusing, but a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and lingered. He moved differently, with a purpose that had a specific destination instead of just the forward momentum of work. "He's sick," said Ruth, older now. 3 years at the ranch, no longer new. "Doesn't look sick," said another hand Fletcher over his coffee. "Something's wrong with him," Ruth insisted. "That's not a normal face on a man at 6 in the morning." Tommy Birch, who was 17 and observant in the way that quiet people tended to be, looked up from his biscuits. "He got a letter," he said, 2 days ago. "I saw it when I brought in the mail." All three men looked at him. "From where?" Ruth asked. "Philadelphia." Tommy went back to his breakfast. The table was silent for a moment. Then Fletcher said, "That's the woman." Nobody had to specify which woman. They found out for certain that afternoon when Eli came back from town with a wagon full of lumber, a bolt of fabric with small blue flowers, 2 cans of white paint, and a rocking chair that he had no practical explanation for. Tommy helped him unload it without comment. Fletcher watched from the barn doorway with his arms folded. Ruth actually walked over. "Crawford," when he said, "and what's all this?" Eli set the paint cans down on the cabin step and looked at him with the calm expression of a man who had recently decided to stop caring what anyone thought. "She's coming," he said, "in September." Ruth stared at him. "The woman, the one you've been writing to?" "That's right. The one who never wrote back." "She wrote back." Another silence. "Well," Ruth said, and walked away and didn't ask any more questions. The boss watched the whole transformation with the quiet amusement of a man who had seen plenty of human nature and had long since stopped being surprised by its capacity for stubborn, extravagant hope. "You know she might not stay," he said to Eli one Sunday afternoon, watching him replace the cabin's 2 cracked windows with new panes he'd ordered from Cheyenne. "She's from the city, Philadelphia. Most women who come out here from back east don't last a season. Eli set the window frame into the opening and checked the level. Most women aren't Eleanor, he said. You don't know Eleanor, the boss said, not unkindly. You know her letters? That's not the same thing. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're right. I don't know if she snores or if she's short-tempered in the mornings or if she'll hate the winters. But I know she kept writing or kept reading anyway for 7 years without sending a single word back. I know she got on a train and traveled across the country to meet a man she's never seen. That's enough for me to try. The boss nodded slowly, didn't say anything else, just watched Eli fit the new window glass into the frame with steady hands. April came. The work intensified the way it always did in spring. Branding inoculations, moving cattle to the greener pastures in the hills, repairing winter damage to the fences and outbuildings. Eli ran the ranch by day and worked on the cabin every evening and through the weekends. He replaced the rotting floorboards, painted the walls white, hung the curtains the fabric with small blue flowers because Eleanor had mentioned in her 14th letter that her classroom windows had curtains with small blue flowers, and she had always found them comforting. He had not forgotten that. He had not forgotten any of it. He built bookshelves along the east wall, even though his own reading was slow and effortful, sounding out words the way he'd been doing since his mother taught him at a kitchen table in a house he barely remembered now. He ordered books from the general store catalog, not because he'd read them, but because she was a school teacher, and school teachers needed books the way cowboys needed rope. He ordered 7 titles without knowing whether she'd already read all of them, and when the parcel arrived, he arranged them on the shelf by height and stood back and thought it looked like something a person could come home to. He tried to learn to cook. This was a project of considerable ambition and equally considerable failure. His first attempt at bread produced something Tommy Birch described with characteristic understatement as enthusiastic. His first attempt at a proper stew resulted in something that had to be disposed of quickly and without discussion. By the 3rd week, he had managed a respectable pot of soup and a serviceable corn cake, which he counted as victory. Tommy started spending evenings in the cabin, ostensibly to help, but mostly Eli suspected because he was curious about the transformation happening there. Boss Tommy said one evening watching Eli attempt for the 2nd time to boil eggs without miscalculating the timing, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When you wrote all those letters, did you really believe she was going to write back someday?" Eli considered the question seriously. Outside the window, the Wyoming dusk was doing what it did in spring, turning the sky 3 different colors at once and making the plains look like a painting that kept improving itself. "No," he said, "not really, not after the 1st year." "Then why'd you keep going?" "Because it helped." He tested one of the eggs, found it too soft, put it back. Writing about things makes them real, makes them exist outside your own head. And when everything around you is, he paused, looking for the right word, when everything is just work and weather and the same conversations with the same men, you need something that belongs only to you, something that moves. Tommy was quiet for a while, digesting this. "What if she gets here and it's different?" he said. "Than what you imagined." "It will be different," Eli said. "It's always different in person." "That doesn't scare you." Eli looked at the egg, then at the young man sitting across the table from him. "Everything about this scares me," he said. "What's your point?" Tommy almost smiled. "No point, just asking." He stayed for supper, and the eggs were better this time, and they ate in companionable silence while the last of the light left the sky. May arrived, and with it, the first letters from Eleanor. They were short, careful, as though she was feeling her way across unfamiliar ground. She apologized in the first one, a lengthy, precise, honest accounting of everything she had not done and why. Her father, she explained, had been ill, seriously ill, the kind of illness that required everything from the person caring for him. For 4 years from nearly the beginning of Eli's letters, she had read every word he sent and been unable to respond because every hour that wasn't spent teaching was spent at her father's bedside. And then when he died, the shame of having waited so long had turned into a wall she didn't know how to climb. "I kept your letters in a box under the bed," she wrote. "I read them when the nights were bad. I'm not proud of what that made me, someone who took without giving. I don't expect you to understand." Eli read that letter 4 times and then wrote back, "Stop apologizing, you survived. That's the only thing that matters." Her next letter was longer. She told him about the school, 30 children, a building that leaked when it rained hard, not enough chalk, too many students who came in hungry and couldn't concentrate. She told him about the city in winter, which she described with such precision that Eli could almost smell the coal smoke, and the horse traffic and the bread from the bakery around the corner from her boarding house. She told him she owned 3 dresses. She told him she was plain. She told him she was 30 years old and had never been west of the Alleghenies. When you see me, she wrote, please don't pretend to be surprised. I am exactly what I've told you I am. Nothing more and nothing less. Eli sat with that letter for a long time before he wrote back. Eleanor, I am 25 years old. I own 1 good shirt. My hands are permanently damaged by rope and cold, and I cannot dance or talk properly in polite company. I am exactly what I've told you I am. When you step off that train, I will be the one standing on the platform who looks like he might have forgotten how to breathe. Her response came 3 weeks later. Then we will both be terrified together. I arrived September 12th, the 2 o'clock train. He read that sentence until he had it memorized. Then he folded the letter and put it under his pillow and fell asleep, holding the knowledge that something was coming, something real and strange and completely unlike anything the past 7 years had prepared him for. August arrived with brutal heat that shimmered off the plains and waves, and with it, an anxiety in Eli's chest that no amount of work could fully outpace. The cabin was done, or as done as he could make it. The shelves were built, the curtains hung the floor solid underfoot, the bookshelves full. He'd planted a small kitchen garden on the south side that had actually produced something edible. He'd built a front porch with a proper railing and set the rocking chair in the corner where the afternoon light fell best. It looked, he thought, like a place someone could be comfortable. He hoped she thought so too. He also thought, what if she got off the train and took one look at him and got right back on? The thought arrived regularly without invitation. He was rough. He knew he was rough, not in the dismissive, self-deprecating way men sometimes perform their limitations, but in the straightforward way of understanding his actual inventory. He was a cattleman. He had permanent calluses on both hands. His face was weathered 10 years beyond his age. He was not educated, not polished, not anything that a schoolteacher from Philadelphia might reasonably be expected to choose. What he was someone who had written to her faithfully for 7 years without asking anything in return. He hoped that counted for something. He hoped it counted for enough. The night before she was due to arrive, Tommy found him on the porch at midnight, sitting in the rocking chair he'd bought for Eleanor, staring at the sky. You should be sleeping, Tommy said. Can't. Tommy sat on the step without being invited. They were quiet for a while. What's the worst that could happen? Tommy said eventually. Eli thought about it. She gets off the train, takes one look at this place, and gets back on. And the best? Eli looked at the stars, still bright, still uncountable, still the same stars he'd been writing about for 7 years. She stays, he said. We figure out how to be real to each other. We build something. That's all. That's everything. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then, you wrote letters for 7 years to a woman who never answered. You already did the impossible. Tomorrow's just what comes next. Eli looked at him. When did you get wise? He said. Tommy shrugged. I listen to you think out loud. When you don't know, I can hear you. You say smart things when you're not trying. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tommy went to bed and Eli stayed on the porch until the first gray light of dawn began to show in the east. And then he went inside and lay down and closed his eyes and thought about nothing at all until sleep finally took him. He woke at noon to someone shaking his shoulder. The boss stood over him. Train comes in at 2, he said. You've got 2 hours. Eli was out of the bed before the sentence was finished. He washed and shaved and changed into his good shirt, the one without any visible stains, and combed his hair into something that didn't look entirely like he'd slept on it, even though he had. He drank half a cup of coffee standing up. Tommy pressed a clean bandana into his hands at the door. For your hands, Tommy said, so you have something to do with them. Eli pocketed the bandana and saddled his horse and rode into Cheyenne at a pace that was faster than sensible and slower than he wanted. The train station was a plain wooden building at the east end of town, with a platform that ran the length of a passenger car and a clock tower that currently read 148. A dozen people were on the platform, families, waiting businessmen with bags, a group of men with surveying equipment heading somewhere that required significant measurement. Eli tied his horse at the rail, walked to the platform, and stood with his hat in his hands. The clock moved to 1:52, then 1:55. The sound of a train whistle came down the track, distant first, then closer, then very close indeed. Eli's hands tightened on his hat brim. The train pulled in at exactly 2 o'clock. Steam, noise, the hiss of brakes. The platform came alive with the organized chaos of arrival. Passengers stepped down, men in city clothes, women with children, an elderly couple, a minister with a worn Bible under one arm. Eli watched every face. And then he saw her. She stood on the bottom step of the third passenger car, one hand on the railing, the other clutching a small traveling bag. She wore a gray dress with worn edges. She had told him about that dress in her third letter, though she hadn't known then that he would one day be looking for it on a train platform. Her hair was dark, pulled back simply, 30 years old and looking it and not trying to look otherwise. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Their eyes found each other across the platform, across 7 years of letters and silence and reaching into nothing, across the space between who they had been when this began and who they were now. Eli moved toward her. His boots felt like they were made of lead. They stopped 3 feet apart. "Eli," she said. Her voice was softer than he'd imagined it, steadier than he would have expected from someone who had just traveled 4 days across a continent to meet a stranger. "Eleanor." His voice broke on the second syllable. He had not prepared for that. She looked at him with the careful, direct attention of someone taking inventory. He looked at her the same way. She started. But he said at the same time. They both stopped. For half a second, in the noise and steam and crowd of the Cheyenne station, neither of them said anything at all. Then Eli did something he had not planned, something he had never done with any woman in his life. He stepped forward, dropped his hat, and pulled her into his arms, not gently, not with the careful restraint of a man trying to make a good first impression, but with the desperate, wordless relief of someone who had been bracing for impact for 7 years and had finally arrived. Eleanor went still. Then her traveling bag hit the platform, and her arms came up around his shoulders, and she held him back just as hard. "I'm here," she said against his shoulder. Her voice had lost its steadiness. "I'm really here." Eli meant to say something worthy of the moment. 7 years of letters, and he couldn't produce a single word. Instead, his shoulders started to shake. The tears came without his permission. He felt them and could not stop them, and did not try. 7 years of loneliness. 7 years of writing into silence. 7 years of being told he was a fool for hoping all of it, breaking open at once in the steam and noise of the Laramie station, while strangers walked past and stared. Eleanor didn't pull away, didn't stiffen, didn't say a word about the fact that a grown man was coming apart in front of God and everyone on a public train platform. She just held on tighter and pressed her face against his shoulder and said very quietly, I know. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet and his eyes were red, and he had never in his life been more embarrassed or more free. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I didn't mean—" "Don't." She reached up and touched his cheek briefly, the way you touch something you've been thinking about for a long time and are finally allowed to reach. Her own eyes were bright. "Don't you dare apologize for that." He picked up his hat, picked up her bag, tried to put himself back together. "I have a wagon," he said, "whenever you're ready." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Take me home," she said. Home. She called it home 5 minutes after stepping off the train in a place she had never been. Something in Eli's chest, something that had been held tight for 7 years, finally let go. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and led her to the wagon. They rode out of Cheyenne in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, not the silence of two people with nothing to say, or the silence of two people afraid to say the wrong thing, but the quieter silence that comes after a long tension has finally released itself. The kind that feels like a room after a storm has passed through it. Eleanor sat on the wagon seat with her hands folded in her lap and watched Wyoming go by, and Eli sat beside her with the reins loose in his hands and watched her watch the land. The plains were doing what they did in September, that particular late afternoon gold that made everything look finished and important, as though the light itself was confirming that what was happening out here mattered. The mountains, still snow-capped on the highest peaks, were visible to the west, small and sharp against a sky the color of old glass. After maybe 20 minutes, Eleanor spoke. "I'm afraid to talk to you," she said. Eli glanced at her. "Why?" She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Because in the letters I knew what to say. I had time to think, to make the words come out right, but now—" She paused and something moved across her face. "Now I don't know how to be the woman you've been writing to. You don't have to be anyone except who you are. What if who I am disappoints you?" Eli pulled the wagon to a stop. Not urgently, just pulled the horses to a halt on the empty road and turned on the seat to face her directly. "Eleanor," he said, "you got on a train and traveled 4 days and crossed half the country to meet a man you've never seen based on nothing except letters. You're already braver than I am. Nothing you do from here on out is going to disappoint me. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were the same color as dark water, a kind of deep brown that held the light differently depending on which direction she was looking. You say that now, she said. I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned back to the road. All right, she said. He clicked the horses forward. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Not the aftermath of storm silence, but the more tentative silence of two people feeling their way towards something. A testing silence. Eleanor's hands unfolded in her lap and she started asking questions, careful ones at first about the ranch and the land and the work, and then gradually less careful ones, the kind that had been accumulating across 7 years of one-sided correspondence. Did you really read in the bunkhouse? She asked, with all those other men around. Whenever I could find something to read, which wasn't often. And they gave you trouble for it? Some. He thought about Ruth. Most men out here, they'd rather play cards than read. But it didn't bother me. I was used to being the strange one. Were you always like that? Or did you become it? The question was direct in a way that caught him slightly off guard. He thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. I think I was born with it and then life made it worse. Or better, depending on how you look at it. Eleanor nodded slowly. I think I was born with it too, she said quietly. The feeling of being somewhere adjacent to everyone else instead of actually inside it. Eli looked at her. Loneliness, he said. Loneliness, she agreed. They looked at each other, and then for the first time since she'd stepped off the train, they both smiled, not the polite, careful smiles of strangers trying to reassure each other, but real smiles, the kind that happen before you remember to monitor your face. Something settled between them after that. Not resolved, not the enormous, complicated thing that 7 years of letters had created between two people who had never touched but present in a different way. Like a table that had just been set. Like a room with the windows opened for the first time after a long winter. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent, the main house and barn and corrals, and then set apart from them, at the edge of the property, the cabin. White walls, a porch with a railing, a rocking chair in the corner, the curtains visible through the clean windows. Eleanor sat up. She didn't say anything. Eli stopped the wagon in front of the cabin and climbed down and came around to help her. She stood on the ground and looked at everything, the white paint, the porch, the curtains, the small kitchen garden on the south side, with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Is that it? She said. Yes, ma'am. She was quiet. Eli's stomach tightened. It was too small. It was too rough. It looked like what it was, a working man's cabin on a working cattle ranch dressed up with a coat of paint and some new curtains. Not a home someone from Philadelphia had any reason to choose. I know it's not, he started. You planted a garden, Eleanor said. He stopped. She was looking at the south side of the cabin, where a small kitchen garden sat inside a fence he'd built from scraps. Tomatoes mostly and some herbs he'd ordered from a catalog without knowing quite what he'd use them for. They were not impressive. They were alive, though. It's not much, he said. You planted a garden, she said again, as though that was the point. As though the tomatoes themselves had said something important about his character. She walked toward the porch, ran her hand along the railing, touched the rocking chair. Then she turned and he saw that her eyes were bright with tears she hadn't let fall yet. The curtains, she said, they have small blue flowers. Eli didn't say anything. I mentioned them in a letter, she said. Years ago, I said I liked them. Your 14th letter, he said. You wrote that your classroom had curtains with small blue flowers and you found them comforting. Eleanor stared at him. You remember that? I remember everything you wrote. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. The tears were closer now. Eli, she said, I don't deserve this. Yes, you do. I should have written back years ago. I let shame keep me. Eleanor. His voice was gentle, but it stopped her. We both did what we had to do. You took care of your father. I took care of myself. Neither of us was wrong. We just weren't ready until now. She looked at him with the tears finally falling and didn't say anything for a moment. How can you not be angry with me? She asked. Because anger needs blame, he said, and I don't blame you for being human. She sat down on the porch steps suddenly, like the words had taken the last of her energy. Eli sat on the step below her, and they were quiet for a little while, and the evening came on around them with the particular gentleness that September evenings sometimes had in Wyoming. Not the brutal cold of winter or the baking heat of August, but something between, something almost kind. Tell me something that wasn't in the letters, he said eventually. She looked at him. What do you mean? Anything, something real, something you'd say to someone you actually know. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking. I talk in my sleep, she said. My students used to tell me when we had field trips and stayed overnight somewhere. Apparently, I carry on entire conversations. I never remember any of it. Eli almost smiled. What do you say? Nobody's ever told me anything useful, just that I sound very certain about whatever I'm saying. That doesn't surprise me. She looked at him sharply, then understood it wasn't an insult, and something relaxed in her shoulders. Your turn, she said. I can't whistle, he said. Every man out here can whistle. I can't. I've tried for 25 years. She looked at him. That's what you chose to tell me. You said something real. That's real. She laughed. It was a short surprise sound like it had gotten out before she could decide whether to let it. And it was the best thing Eli had heard in 7 years. They sat on the porch until the stars came out. Then he showed her inside. The cabin interior was clean and lit by the warm light of the 2 lanterns he'd set on the windowsills before leaving that morning. The books on the shelves. The table that didn't wobble. The kitchen area where he'd practiced cooking enough times to produce something that didn't require apology. He'd set flowers on the table, wildflowers dried now at the end of summer, arranged in an old tin can because he didn't own a vase. Eleanor walked in slowly, stopped in the middle of the room and turned in a slow circle, taking everything in. Then she went to the bookshelf. She read the spines with her fingers trailing along them the way you'd greet old friends. Some she'd read, some she hadn't, some were titles he'd ordered based solely on their length, reasoning that a longer book represented better value for the money. You built these shelves yourself, she said. Took 3 tries to get them level. You bought these books for me. He didn't argue the point. She turned around. There were no tears now, but her eyes were still bright, and she looked at him with the direct, unhidden attention of someone who has decided to stop managing her reactions. I need to say something, she said. All right. I read your letters the way I imagine some people read scripture. Not for comfort exactly, but for evidence. That something beyond the circumstances of my life was possible. She paused. I don't tell you that because I think you need to hear it. I tell you because you should know that what you did, what you kept doing for 7 years wasn't foolishness. It was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. Eli stood very still. Eleanor, he said. Don't argue with me, she said. I'm a school teacher. I know what I'm talking about. This time they both laughed, and the laughter was easier and more natural, and the room felt smaller and warmer, and more like a place where 2 people could learn each other. That was when the knock came at the door. Eli opened it to find the boss standing there with Tommy and 2 other hands, Fletcher and Roof, who had apparently decided that curiosity outweighed decorum. Figured we'd come say hello, the boss said. His expression was composed, which with him was a kind of warmth. If that's all right. Eli looked at Eleanor. She had straightened and composed herself with the efficient self-possession of a woman who had spent years managing classrooms full of other people's children. Please, she said. The men filed in with their hats in their hands. They stood in the small space and looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked back at them with the kind of calm directness that made men behave better than they'd planned to. Ma'am, the boss said, I'm Henry Alderson. I run this operation. These are some of the men who work it. Mrs. Crawford, Eleanor said. She tried the name carefully the way you try a new word for the first time. I'm very glad to meet you all. Tommy stepped forward. He was red-faced and clearly had something to say, and equally clearly had not thought through the exact words yet. Ma'am, he said, I want you to know. The boss has been working himself half to death getting this place ready for you. He burned himself on the stove twice trying to learn to cook. He rebuilt those shelves 3 times, and he's the best man in Wyoming. He took a breath. I thought you should know that. Eleanor looked at Eli. Eli looked at the ceiling. I'm beginning to gather that, Eleanor said. Thank you for telling me. The men stayed for 20 minutes making careful conversation, drinking the coffee Eleanor made with the grounds in the kettle. She found exactly where she would have expected a practical person to keep them. Then they left, and the cabin was quiet again, and Eli and Eleanor looked at each other across the table. They respect you, she said. They tolerate me, he said. No, she said. Diane, that boy Tommy would do anything you asked. I've taught children long enough to know what genuine admiration looks like. They respect you. Eli was quiet. You've built something real here, Eleanor said. In 7 years, all of it, the ranch, the men, this place. She looked around the cabin again. This is real. It is now, he said. She met his eyes. Ask me, she said. He blinked. What you've been wanting to ask since you wrote the first letter. She said it plainly, without coyness, without performance. Just the direct statement of someone who had traveled 4 days by train and was done pretending they didn't both know what this was. Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, moved around the table, and knelt beside her chair. Because it felt right in a way he couldn't explain, because some things deserved a particular kind of care. Eleanor Voss, he said, I have loved you for 7 years through nothing but ink and paper. I don't know if I can make you happy. I don't know if this life will be enough. But I promise I will try every single day to deserve the faith you showed by getting on that train. He stopped. Will you marry me? He said. Eleanor looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then she reached down and touched his face with both hands, the way she had at the train station, the way you touch something you've been thinking about for a very long time. Yes, she said. Yes, Eli, yes. He stood and she stood with him, and they held each other in the middle of the cabin while the stars wheeled outside the window and the planes made their nighttime sounds. The wind and the cattle and the vast indifferent dark that had surrounded Eli Crawford for the entirety of his adult life, and never until this moment felt anything other than endless. When she asked against his shoulder, as soon as possible, he said, the circuit preacher comes through on Fridays. She pulled back to look at him. That's tomorrow. I know. Eli, she said, we need to talk about real things first. Money. What I'll do here. Whether, do you love me? He said. The question stopped her. She looked at him with something complicated moving behind her eyes. I don't know. I think so. I mean, how do I know if what I feel is love or just hope or gratitude or... I don't know either, Eli said. I know I love the woman in the letters. I know I already care about the woman standing in front of me. Maybe that's enough to start with. What if it isn't? Then we'll find out together and deal with it together. He held her gaze. But I don't think that's going to happen. Eleanor searched his face for a long moment. Tomorrow, she said finally. Tomorrow, he agreed. That night, Eleanor slept in the main house. Mrs. Alderson, the boss's wife, had made up a spare room and insisted on it with the no-nonsense authority of a woman who had long since stopped asking permission for her opinions. You know what you're getting into? She asked Eleanor, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with a pot of tea between them and the kind of frank attention that bypassed social pleasantries entirely. Not entirely, Eleanor said. No. Good. Honest. Mrs. Alderson poured the tea. This life is hard. Winters are brutal. The isolation can break a person. I've seen plenty of women come out here full of romantic ideas about the West and the wide open spaces and leave inside of a year. I understand. Do you because you're a city woman? Philadelphia. I don't say that to be unkind. I say it because this is a different kind of life. Weeks without seeing another woman. Months without civilization. The work never stops. Eleanor wrapped her hands around her teacup and met Mrs. Alderson's eyes steadily. I spent 4 years caring for a dying man in poverty. I don't think you'd believe if I described it, she said. I taught school in a building that barely had enough chalk. I know what hard is, and I would rather face hard here with Eli Crawford than anywhere else without him. Mrs. Alderson looked at her for a long moment. You'll do, she said finally. Meanwhile, in the cabin across the yard, Eli sat on his porch with Tommy and the boss. You sure about tomorrow? The boss said. Moving pretty fast. We've had 7 years, Eli said. How much slower should we go? Marriage is permanent, the boss said. Or it's supposed to be. I know that. Tommy spoke up. Boss, can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you wrote those letters, did you ever actually believe she'd come? Eli thought about it seriously, the way Tommy's questions always seemed to deserve. No, he said finally. I think I wrote them because I didn't believe she would. Because it felt safer to love someone I'd never meet than to risk loving someone real. The distance was the whole point. But she is real now, the boss said. I know, Eli said, and that's the terrifying part. Tommy nodded slowly. Good, if you weren't scared, I'd think you were stupid. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming morning that announced its intentions without ambiguity. Eli put on his good shirt, got his hair under control, tried to shave without cutting himself, and succeeded on the second attempt. Eleanor wore the best of her 3 dresses. Mrs. Alderson had lent her a ribbon for her hair, and she had accepted it with the dignified gratitude of someone who knows that accepting a kindness gracefully is itself a form of strength. The circuit preacher arrived at noon, a tired-looking man named Whitfield, who had performed more weddings and funerals than he could count and had long since stopped being surprised by the circumstances of either. You both sure? He asked them both, looking from one to the other. Yes, they said at the same time without hesitation. The ceremony took place on the porch. The ranch hands stood in a rough semicircle in the yard. Mrs. Alderson cried quietly with her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Tommy stood in the back with his hat over his heart. The preacher spoke about commitment and faith in the particular difficulty of marriage. Eli heard almost none of it. He was looking at Eleanor, trying to memorize exactly what her face looked like in this moment, the September light, the high color in her cheeks, the way she stood with her hands folded and her shoulders straight, as though she had always known this was coming and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. Do you, Eli Crawford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Eleanor Voss, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Eleanor's voice was clear and steady. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss was brief and awkward and absolutely terrifying there first in front of an audience. And when it was over, Eli stepped back and Eleanor looked up at him with her eyes bright and her mouth curving and the hands cheered, and Mrs. Alderson produced the cake she had been secretly baking since the previous evening. The boss shook Eli's hand. Congratulations, Crawford, he said. Now comes the hard part. He was not wrong. That first night was its own particular difficulty, not because of anything that happened, but because of the accumulated weight of everything that hadn't yet happened between them. Two people who knew each other completely in theory and not at all in practice, sharing a small cabin, and the enormous, unfamiliar fact of being married. I can sleep on the floor, Eli offered. Eleanor gave him the look of a woman who had spent 4 years nursing a dying parent and had no patience for unnecessary complication. Don't be ridiculous, she said. We're married. I know, but, Eli. She sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at him with a directness that he was already learning was simply how she was. I'm 30 years old. I know what marriage means. I'm nervous. Are you terrified? He said immediately. Something about the admission released both of them. Eleanor laughed that same short surprise sound from the porch, and Eli sat down across from her, and they talked for 2 hours in the lamplight, trading small truths, learning each other in the specific, unhurried way that only happens when two people have agreed to stay. She snored, she told him. Not loudly, but reliably. She hated the smell of tobacco and had always found cold weather personally offensive. She ground her teeth when she was stressed. She cried at music, any music, even bad music, and always had. He told her about the whistling, demonstrated his inability to produce even a preliminary sound. She laughed until her eyes watered. He told her about the letters that he'd written, the first one because of the wind, and that the wind had been an excuse, and that the truth was he'd seen her name in that column and something in him had simply recognized it. She told him she'd read his first letter in the school supply room on her lunch break with the door closed so no one could see her face. Why, he asked. Because I cried, she said, right away, before I even finished it. And I didn't want anyone to see. Eli was quiet. I wasn't expecting it, she said. Someone who looked at the stars and thought to tell a stranger about it. It was, she searched for the word, exact. It was the exact right thing. When they finally went to sleep, they lay side by side in the dark, careful with each other, learning the grammar of proximity. And it was Eleanor's hand that found his first in the darkness and held on. Eli lay awake for a long time after her breathing deepened into sleep. He was thinking about the shelf he'd built, about the letters he'd written, about the 7 years of Sundays and the letter that had finally come back and the woman now asleep beside him who had traveled 4 days across a country to be here. He was thinking that sometimes the impossible thing was just the possible thing that took longer. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 7 years, Eli Crawford fell asleep not alone. The first real fight happened 3 weeks into the marriage. Eli came home after dark, 15-hour-day cattle drive to the north pasture, 2 broken fence sections, and a lame horse that had cost them the afternoon to find the cabin cold. No fire in the stove, no supper. He found Eleanor at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, the way people looked when they were keeping very still to avoid becoming something they didn't want to become. Eleanor, he set down his hat. What's wrong? Nothing. Her voice was flat. Eleanor, I said nothing. The flatness had an edge under it now. She looked up. I sat here all day, Eli. I sat in this cabin alone for 14 hours. I watched the window. I cleaned things that were already clean. I read everything on those shelves that I hadn't already read. And she stopped, pressed her lips together. I thought I knew what this would be like. I was wrong. Eli pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. What were you expecting? I don't know. Something. Anything. She pressed her palms flat on the table. In the letters you wrote about building a school, about purpose, about partnership, and I believed it. I believed we'd build something together. But I've been here 3 weeks and Her voice broke slightly. She steadied it. What exactly am I supposed to do here? The question landed in the room with a weight that Eli hadn't been prepared for. He opened his mouth to answer and realized he didn't have one. You're supposed to be my wife, cook, manage the house. Be here when I get home. He heard himself thinking it and understood in the same moment how wrong it was. He had spent 7 years writing to a woman about books and ideas and what it meant to build something worthwhile. And somewhere in the planning and the curtains and the shelves and the garden and the rocking chair, he had not thought hard enough about the actual shape of her days. I should have, he started. Don't. She stood up abruptly and moved to the window. Outside, it was fully dark, the ranch invisible beyond the lantern light. Don't tell me you should have thought about it. Tell me what happens now. You can teach, he said. Who? She turned. Mrs. Alderson's daughter is 7. Tommy can barely read. That's 2 students. You need 12 to justify a schoolhouse, and there aren't 12 children within writing distance. Then we start with 2. Eli, we start with 2, he said again more firmly. You build it from there. This is Wyoming. Families are coming. Land is being claimed. In 5 years, there'll be children for 20 miles in every direction. She looked at him for a long moment. 5 years, she said. Maybe 3. She turned back to the window. The silence stretched. I didn't come here to wait 3 years to be useful, she said. You're not waiting, you're planting. He stood up and went to her, carefully aware that the space between them was more complicated than it had been 3 weeks ago. Eleanor, you know how to do this. You've built things from nothing before. That school in Philadelphia, you told me about it. You started with 12 students and ended with 40. The building was a disaster and you made it work. This is the same thing. She didn't turn around. This isn't the same thing, she said quietly. You're right, he said. This is harder and bigger and more important. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm angry, she said. I know. Not at you, at myself, for not thinking it through properly. You're not the only one who didn't think it through properly. She turned then and looked at him, and the anger in her face had shifted into something more complicated. I'm not good at this, she said. At what? Being married, she waved a hand at the cabin, the space between them. Here, in someone else's life. It's your life now, Eli said. Not mine, and you're visiting, ours. I know that. A long pause. I'm still figuring out what it means. He waited. I'll ask Mrs. Alderson for her books tomorrow, she said finally. Good. I'm going to use the cabin. 3 afternoons a week. You'll come home and find students at your kitchen table. Good. Don't say good again, she said. It's starting to sound patronizing. He almost smiled. What should I say? She looked at him. The anger was mostly gone now, replaced by the practical energy he was learning her natural state. Say that you're hungry, she said, because I'm going to cook supper, and I'd rather do it for a reason than for practice. I'm very hungry, Eli said. She went to the stove. He sat back down at the table and watched her move through the small space with the efficient confidence of someone who had cooked in much harder circumstances than this one, and thought that the moment they had just been through uncomfortable and real, and not anything like the first weeks he'd imagined felt more like a marriage than the ceremony on the porch had. The next morning, she rode to the Alderson house, came back 2 hours later with an armful of books and a plan fully formed. She had already spoken to Mrs. Alderson's daughter, already arranged with Tommy to come on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, already written a note to the Henderson family 2 miles east, who had 2 boys, 9 and 11, who had not seen the inside of a schoolroom in 3 years. That's 5 students, she said, setting the books on the shelf in a specific order that suggested she already knew which ones she'd use first. That's a school, Eli said. She looked at him with the expression she'd begun to use for moments when she thought he was being deliberately optimistic. That's a beginning, she said. Same thing. She taught her first lesson the following Tuesday. Eli came home that evening to find Eleanor at the table with Tommy and the Alderson girl, and 2 Henderson boys, all of them bent over slates with the concentrated expressions of people engaged in something difficult but worthwhile. Eleanor was talking them through a simple reading exercise, her voice patient, exact with the particular quality of a person who genuinely believed that what she was teaching mattered. Eli stood in the doorway for a moment, not entering, not wanting to interrupt. He watched Eleanor move between the students, touching a slate here, repositioning a hand there, pausing to explain something to the older Henderson boy who was struggling with a word and didn't want to admit it. She managed them the way a good rider managed horses, without force, without anxiety, with a clear sense of exactly how much pressure to apply and when to ease off. She was extraordinary. He'd known that from the letters. It was something else to see it. "You can come in," Eleanor said without looking up from the slate she was reading. The students all looked at him. Eli came inside, got his own coffee from the pot, and sat in the corner, as unobtrusively as possible. Tommy gave him a look that communicated both embarrassment about being seen in a classroom and a certain stubborn determination to be there anyway. That night, after the students left, Eleanor sat at the table with her tea and said, "The younger Henderson boy reads at a level 2 years above his age. Is that good? It means nobody has been paying attention to him," she said, "which is a shame, but also means he's been figuring it out himself. That kind of student, once you give them real material, just goes." She paused. "Tommy is going to take longer. He's been told too many times that he's not smart. That's harder to undo than ignorance." "He'll do it for you," Eli said. "He'll do it for himself," Eleanor corrected. "I'm just the reason he remembers he's capable of it." Eli looked at her across the table. "You love this," he said. Eleanor considered denying it. He could see her consider it, and then she let it go. "Yes," she said simply, "I do." October deepened into November. The first snow came early and hard. Life settled into a rhythm that was neither what Eli had imagined nor what Eleanor had feared, something more complicated than either, and better for being complicated. She taught her students 3 afternoons a week and spent the rest of her time reading, corresponding with families in the area, planning lessons for students she didn't have yet. Eli ran the ranch during the day and came home in the evenings to a cabin that was warm and lit and full of the evidence of an active mind. They learned each other slowly. The particular vocabulary of living together, which silences were comfortable and which were not, whose instinct to trust when they disagreed about something where the edges were. Eli learned that Eleanor needed mornings to herself and never to be interrupted when she was writing. Eleanor learned that Eli required quiet at breakfast and would talk freely about anything after the second cup of coffee, but not before. They learned each other's harder habits too. Eleanor's tendency to go cold when she was hurt, rather than angry, the particular kind of distance that was worse than shouting. Eli's tendency to go physical when he was anxious to build or fix or mend something as a way of managing what he couldn't quite put into words. One evening in November, she found him replacing a fence rail that didn't need replacing. She watched him for a moment. "What are you worried about?" she said. He didn't stop working. "Nothing." "Eli." He set down the hammer and turned around. "The Henderson family might leave," he said. "I heard in town, money's bad. They're thinking of going east. That's 2 of my 5 students." "I know." She was quiet. "They might not," she said. "They might. And if they do, I'll write more letters to more families and find 2 more. He picked up the hammer again. "I know." "Then what are you actually worried about?" she said. He didn't answer for a moment. "You," he said. She waited. "I'm worried you're happy enough," he said. "Not happy, happy enough. That this life is enough of what you need and not enough of what you want, and someday you'll realize the difference." Eleanor came and stood beside him at the fence. She looked at the plains, dark now, the stars beginning to appear, the same stars he'd been writing about for 7 years. "Eli," she said. "I know. I am not happy enough," she said. "I'm happy, differently than I expected, and less easily than I'd hoped, and with more work than the letters made it sound. But that's how happiness actually is. That's not a problem. That's just the truth." He looked at her. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "I was offered the chance once," she said. "I chose teaching instead because I thought it would matter more." A pause. "I was right." He almost laughed. She went back inside and he finished the fence rail that didn't need fixing. And when he came in, she had made tea and left a cup on his side of the table. He sat down and drank it. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, the cabin was warm. This, Eli thought, is what the letters were for. December arrived with a blizzard. 3 days this time. Not as bad as the winter 5 years ago. The one Eli still thought about when November got cold, but enough to lock them in the cabin together with dwindling wood, and too much time, and the particular friction that proximity generates when 2 people are still learning each other's rhythms. By the second day, they were inventing reasons to disagree. The dishes, the way he left the door open, the way she moved his coffee cup to a different position without asking. "Must you tap your foot like that?" she said on the afternoon of the second day. "Must you reorganize things that are already organized?" he said. They glared at each other across the small space. "It wasn't organized from," she said. "You had it all in one pile." "I knew where everything was." "That's not the same as organized." "In the practical sense, it is." She pressed her lips together. He looked at the window. The snow was still coming down in sheets horizontal, the kind of snow that had opinions about things. I'm going to check on the horses, Eli said. It's a blizzard, Eleanor said. I know that. Eli, you'll freeze. Better than suffocating in here, he said, and was out the door before he could think better of it. He came back 40 minutes later with his eyebrows frosted and his temper considerably improved by the cold and the horse's uncomplicated company. Eleanor was at the table when he came in, and he could see from the set of her shoulders that she had used the 40 minutes to move from irritation into something quieter and harder. I hate this, she said, not angrily, just true. He hung up his coat. The blizzard. Fighting with you. She turned. Her eyes were red at the edges. I hate that we fight over nothing. That a snowstorm turns us into people who bicker about coffee cups. He sat down across from her. We're not used to each other yet. I know, but I thought... She stopped. Started again. In the letters I could always say the right thing. I had time to say the right thing. Now I open my mouth and whatever comes out is whatever's actually in my head unedited, and sometimes that's not the right thing at all. Good, Eli said. She looked at him. Good. In the letters I could always say the right thing too. That's not real. This, he gestured between them. This is real, including the part where you move my coffee cup and it drives me completely out of my mind. She almost smiled. It wasn't organized. It was organized by my system. Your system was a pile. A very intentional pile. The tension had shifted into something else, still present but different in quality. She reached across the table. We're going to keep doing this, she said, fighting over nothing. Probably, he agreed. And then we're going to stop. Probably that too. She held his hand. Outside, the blizzard hammered the walls, and the wind made sounds it shouldn't have been able to make, and the cabin creaked and held. Tell me about the summer, she said. Before I came, what were the days like? So he told her. About the heat and the work and the wagon full of lumber he'd bought with every dollar he'd saved. About burning himself on the stove trying to cook. About Tommy staying late to help and staying later to ask questions. About the night he'd stood outside and looked at the cabin he'd built and said out loud to nobody that it was finished and then gone back in and found 12 more things that needed doing. She told him about her last month in Philadelphia. About the particular weight of leaving the school she'd taught at for 4 years, the students she wouldn't see, finish the ones she worried about. About the last letter she'd sent him and the 3 drafts that preceded it and the fact that she'd written it and then carried it around for 2 days before she posted it because she was afraid of what would happen if he answered. What were you afraid of, he asked. That it would be real, she said, that I would have to actually do it. Show up. Be the person the letters implied I was. You are that person. I'm more complicated than the letters. So am I, Eli said. That's why we've got the rest of our lives to figure it out. The blizzard ended on the 3rd day. They dug out the cabin door, cleared the path to the barn, checked on the livestock, and assessed the damage. Minor compared to what it could have been. The horses were fine. The cattle had sheltered. The fence on the north side had come down in 2 sections, which meant work, but not urgent work. That evening, Eleanor stood on the porch and looked at the snow everywhere. Absolute, the whole world turned into a single uninterrupted surface of white and said, "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Eli stood beside her. "You're not from here," he said. "No. Give it a few more blizzards," he said. "The beauty wears off." She leaned against the porch railing and looked at him sideways. "Does it really?" He thought about it. "No," he said honestly. "It doesn't. The cold does. The beauty doesn't." She turned back to the snow. The stars were out clear and uncountable the way they only got after a storm had scoured the sky. "You wrote about the stars," she said, "in your first letter. You said they looked like holes punched through a black cloth." "I remember. I read that, and I thought..." She paused. "I thought here is a man who pays attention to the exact right things." She looked at him. "That was what I knew about you before anything else. Before the stories and the letters and all the rest of it. You pay attention." Eli looked at the stars. "They're different tonight," he said, "after the storm." "How?" "Brighter," he said, "like they had to push through something to get here." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Like us," she said. He looked at her. She was already looking at him. "Like us," he agreed. They went back inside. The cabin was warm. The stove was doing its job. Outside, the snow glittered under a sky full of stars that had pushed through 7 years of silence and 1 blizzard to get to this particular night, on this particular porch between these 2 particular people. Eli thought about the first letter he had written, the bunkhouse and the wind and the blank page and the name in the newspaper, and thought about how strange it was that a life could pivot on something that small. A name in a column in a newspaper that someone had left at a supply depot. He thought I would write every one of those letters again. He thought I would wait another 7 years. Eleanor fell asleep first the way she usually did, and Eli lay awake in the dark, listening to Wyoming being quiet after the storm, and thought that 3 months ago he had been alone in this cabin, and now he was not, and the difference between those two things was everything. January brought news that neither of them had expected. Mrs. Alderson's sister in Cheyenne had just had a baby at difficult birth, difficult recovery, a husband who worked the rail lines and was gone more than he was home. She needed help, real help, the kind that required someone to be physically present for several months, not someone to send a letter and pray. Mrs. Alderson sat across from Eleanor in the main house kitchen on a gray Thursday morning and told her this plainly. "My sister needs me," she said. "I'll be leaving next week. I'm going to be gone until spring at the earliest." Eleanor nodded. "Of course, your family comes first. That's not why I came to tell you." Mrs. Alderson set down her coffee cup. "Cheyenne has a schoolhouse, Eleanor, a real one, built 2 years ago. Right now there's no teacher. The woman who ran it married a rancher and moved north. The school board has been looking for a replacement since September." Eleanor was very still. "You could apply," Mrs. Alderson said. "You're qualified, more than qualified. You'd have real resources, a real building, real materials, more students than you've got here." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "I'm married to a man who works this ranch," Eleanor said. "You could come back on weekends. It's 50 miles. Caleb Eli, he could come to town on his 2-week rotations when the work allows." "That's not a marriage," Eleanor said. "That's a correspondence with occasional visits." "It might be what makes you whole," Mrs. Alderson said quietly, "and I think you know that." She left Eleanor there with the coffee and the knowledge and the long, complicated silence of a choice she hadn't been given time to prepare for. Eli found her at the table that evening, the same way she'd been when the blizzard was building and the walls were closing in, except this time the walls were the right distance apart, and the stillness in her was not frustration, but something harder to name. "Mrs. Alderson told you," he said. "Yes." He sat down. She looked at her hands. "What do you want to do?" he said. She shook her head once. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She looked up at him. The thing in her face was complicated want and guilt, and the particular difficulty of wanting something that might cost someone else. "What does it say about me?" she said. "If I'd rather be in Cheyenne teaching other people's children than here with my husband." "It says you're human," Eli said. "Eli, Eleanor." He leaned forward on the table. "When I wrote those letters, every letter I wrote about building something together. A school. Something with purpose. I meant every word, but I was so focused on getting you here that I didn't think hard enough about what happens after. What you'd actually need to be whole." He paused. "This is me thinking about it." She was quiet. "I'm not whole without purpose," she said finally. "I know that about myself. I've always known it. But I thought," a long pause, "I thought that being here building something from the beginning would be purpose enough, and it is. It could be, but it's slower than I expected and harder than I expected, and some days—" She stopped. "Some days what?" She met his eyes. "Some days the isolation is so complete I feel like I'm disappearing." Eli absorbed that. "Then go," he said. The words fell into the room like stones. Eleanor stared at him. "Teach," he said. "Build your school. Come back when you can. We'll make it work. And if we can't—" He held her gaze for a long moment. "Then we'll deal with that when we get there," he said. "But Eleanor, I would rather have you living your purpose 50 miles away than watching you disappear here to stay near me." She stood up and walked to the window. Outside it was dark, the ranch invisible. She pressed one hand flat against the glass. "What if the distance breaks us?" she said. "Then we were already breaking," Eli said, "and we just couldn't see it." She was quiet for a long time. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. Not of going, of leaving you." She turned from the window. "Of waking up one morning and realizing that the practical thing I did for practical reasons has cost me the one thing I actually—" She stopped. "The one thing you what?" Eli said carefully. She looked at him. "The one thing I love," she said. The room held that for a moment. Eli stood up, moved to her. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold room. "You won't lose me," he said. "I wrote to you for 7 years without receiving a word back. I can survive 2 weeks." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You're impossible," she said. "I prefer persistent," he said. She went to Cheyenne with Mrs. Alderson 8 days later. Took her 3 dresses, her books, and a promise from Eli that he would come to town every 2 weeks without fail. The cabin felt different without her. Eli had expected it to feel like before the clean, quiet emptiness of the bachelor years. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like a room after the furniture has been moved, everything in its place, but the negative space wrong, the proportions all off. He'd been alone in the cabin for 5 years before Eleanor arrived. He'd been alone in it for 4 months with her. And those 4 months had rearranged the room in a way that couldn't be undone. He worked longer hours, ate standing up, stopped making the bed because it seemed like a performance with no audience. Tommy noticed within 3 days. Boss, he said, finding Eli in the barn at 11 o'clock at night doing inventory he'd already done that morning. You should be sleeping. Couldn't. You miss her. Obviously. Tommy sat on a hay bale. He'd gotten older looking in the past year. Eli noticed the soft edges of 17 going angular and deliberate. Why'd you let her go? Tommy said. Eli kept working. Because wanting someone to stay when staying is costing them something essential isn't love. It's just need. Tommy was quiet digesting this. That's the kind of thing that sounds good when you say it, he said. Does it still sound good at 11 o'clock when you're doing inventory twice? Eli set down his clipboard. No, he said. It sounds like exactly what it is, which is the right thing and the hard thing at the same time. The 2 weeks felt like a season. When Eli finally rode into Cheyenne, his whole body was doing something that he recognized from years of writing letters as the particular agitation of anticipation, the way the body outruns the mind when it knows something important is coming. He found Eleanor in a small schoolroom on Garrison Street, teaching 6 children ranging in age from 7 to 13. She had her back to the door when he walked in, writing something on the board in her precise schoolteacher's hand, and he stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she turned. When she did, her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Class, she said with the particular controlled voice of a person managing a strong reaction in front of an audience, we'll resume tomorrow. The children left. The door closed. They stood on opposite sides of the room. You're early, she said. I wrote fast. She crossed the room and put her arms around him and held on, and he held on back. And for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. How is it? He said. Good, she said against his shoulder. Really good. 13 students as of Monday. A real building. Proper materials. One of the fathers on the school board built me 3 new bookshelves last week because I mentioned I needed them. A pause. He did it in 2 tries. Yours took 3. Is that a comparison? Purely informational. He pulled back to look at her. She looked different. Not better or worse, but differently present. Energized in a specific way. The way a person looks when they're doing something that fits them precisely. You love it, he said. Yes, she said. Are you happy? She looked at him steadily. I'm miserable without you, she said. And I love the school. Both things are true at the same time, and I don't know what to do about it. They spent the night in her small room at the boarding house. They talked until the lamp ran low, then laid together in the dark, and it was different than the cabin, smaller, less theirs, with the sounds of the city coming through the walls. But the quality of the dark was the same. The quality of being together was the same. In the morning, Eli had to leave. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. He kissed her. Rode back to the ranch. Felt the absence open up again behind him like a country he was leaving. 3 months of this. Every 2 weeks, the ride into Cheyenne, the one night in the boarding house, the morning that came too fast, the ride back to a cabin that never quite felt the same. Eleanor's letters came weekly, longer than they'd been in the beginning, and somehow different from the letters he'd received before she came. Those letters had been windows into a life he wasn't part of. These were dispatches from a life they both belonged to, separated by 50 miles and 2 weeks. He wrote back, every Sunday just like before, but different now. Not into silence, into the specific warmth of a woman he knew in the particular way that only comes from sleeping beside someone, from fighting about coffee cups, from watching someone cry over music on a Tuesday night, for no particular reason. The cabin was not empty anymore, even when it was empty, but it was quieter than it should have been. In March, Eli's horse threw him. He'd been moving cattle through a narrow draw in the north pasture. Good horse, one he'd worked with for 3 years, spooked by something in the scrub, a snake or a rabbit or nothing at all, and went down hard on rock. He heard something crack. Then the world went white. Tommy found him an hour later. He was conscious by then, barely propped against a boulder, with his left arm held at an angle that made Tommy go pale and look away. Get the boss, Eli said. His voice sounded strange to him. very far away. They loaded him into a wagon. Every rut in the road to Cheyenne was a separate event. He was unconscious again by the time they reached the doctor's office. The doctor set the broken arm, confirmed 3 broken ribs, said he was fortunate the fall hadn't been 6 inches to the left, or the conversation would be happening with different personnel. Someone needed to get word to his wife. They sent Tommy. Eleanor arrived within 2 hours. She came through the doctor's office door with the specific velocity of someone who has been told something bad and responded by moving very fast toward it. The doctor caught her before she reached the back room. "He's stable," he said quickly. She stopped. "He's going to be fine," the doctor said. "Arm is set. Ribs will heal. He needs 6 weeks of rest, and he is going to be a very difficult patient." Eleanor's face went through several things. Then she said, "Can I see him?" She came into the back room and stopped in the doorway. Eli was awake. He looked diminished somehow, which was not a word that applied to him under ordinary circumstances. The arm was splinted to the elbow. He was the particular gray-white color of someone in significant pain who was managing it by being very still. "Eleanor," he said. His voice had a rough edge she hadn't heard before. She came and sat beside him and took his good hand in both of hers and held on. "You're all right," she said, not a question. "I will be," he said. "The horse, I don't care about the horse. The cattle in the North Draw need Eli." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "I don't care about the cattle. I care about you. Stop talking about anything except whether you're in pain." He was quiet for a moment. "A fair amount," he admitted. "That's honest." She tightened her hands around his. "Good. I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For worrying you. For this." He looked at the splinted arm with an expression of profound personal offense. "You didn't choose to fall off your horse," she said. "I should have been paying better attention." "Eli, stop." He stopped. She sat with him while the doctor gave him something for the pain, and sat with him while it took effect and was still there when it made him drowsy. She watched his face change from the tightly controlled look of a man managing something hard to the looser, more open look of someone beginning to let go of it. "Eleanor," he said, his voice was slow and thick with the medication. "I'm here. Don't go back yet." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I mean, don't go back to Cheyenne." He was fighting to keep his eyes open. "Not yet, not for a while." She looked at him. "Stay here," he said. He stopped. "I hate that I need help." "I know you do, but I want you here." "I know that too." He closed his eyes. His hand was still in hers. His breathing deepened slowly into sleep. Eleanor sat with him in the doctor's back room, holding his hand while the afternoon light moved across the floor. She had been afraid for the 2 hours between Tommy's message in this room. Really afraid in a way she hadn't been since her father's worst days. The specific fear of losing someone before you've said all the things you meant to say, before you've had all the time you thought you had. She had been 50 miles away when it happened. She thought about that for a long time while Eli slept. She moved him into her boarding house room 2 days later, once the doctor declared him fit to be moved. She arranged his pillows, brought his meals, argued with him every morning about what he was and wasn't allowed to do, and lost several of these arguments and won enough of them to matter. She kept teaching. Her school was 6 blocks away. She was back by mid-afternoon every day. The students sent a card, 13 names in 13 different sizes of handwriting, with a drawing of a horse in the corner that was clearly the work of the 7-year-old, and that Eleanor kept on the table where Eli could see it. "They like you," she said. "They like that I don't treat them like they're stupid," she said. "It's a low bar, but here we are." He watched her grade papers by lamplight most evenings, her pen moving fast occasionally, stopping occasionally, producing the quiet noise she made when she found something a student had written that surprised her. "What?" he asked the 3rd or 4th time she made the noise. She looked up. Henry Marsh wrote about his father. His father lost 3 fingers at the mill last year. Henry's been angry about it all year, acting out, getting into trouble. And this, she looked at the paper. "This is the first time he's written about it directly. He says his father still works, with 7 fingers. He says his father says 7 is enough. And then Henry says," she read it, "he says 7 is enough because it has to be, and I'm going to be like that too." She set the paper down. "He's 10 years old." Eli looked at her. "That's why you do it," he said. She looked at the paper. "Yes," she said quietly, "that's why." The 6 weeks of recovery became 8 weeks. The arm healed slower than expected. Eli chafed at the inactivity in the specific way of men who are accustomed to working their way through problems and had been presented with a problem that could not be worked. He was a difficult patient in exactly the ways the doctor had predicted. Eleanor managed him with the precise patience of a woman who had spent 15 years in charge of other people's children and had developed a comprehensive toolkit for managing difficult personalities with dignity intact. "You're doing that thing again," she told him one morning. "What thing?" "The thing where you look at the window as if looking at it hard enough will open it by will alone and let you escape." He looked at her. "Is it working?" "No," she said. "Drink your coffee." He drank his coffee. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes." "I've been thinking about escaping, about us." He set down the cup. She was at the table across from him, grading papers, and she looked up. "About what happens when I'm healed." She put down her pen. "What about it?" she said carefully. "I don't want to go back to the way it was before," he said. "Before the accident, the 2 weeks, the visiting, the distance. I don't—" He stopped, found the exact words. "I don't want to love you from 50 miles away anymore. I did it for 7 years from 2,000 miles. I don't want to do a scaled-down version of the same thing." Eleanor was quiet. "Then what do you want?" she said. "I want the school to be on the ranch," he said, "like I originally wrote about. I want to build it. A real building with real materials, with a dormitory for students who live too far to ride daily. I want families to come to us instead of you going to them." She looked at him. "That would cost everything we have," she said. "I know. It would take years." "I know that too." She was very still. "Eli," she said, "I'm not going to give up the Cheyenne school to come back and wait while you build something that might not work." "I know that," he said. "I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to help me plan something worth giving it up for." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she got up from the table, went to the desk in the corner of the room, and came back with a piece of paper and a pencil. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said. And they planned. For the remaining weeks of his recovery, they planned the way they'd written letters honestly, completely working through problems instead of around them. The cost, everything they'd saved, plus whatever they could borrow against the ranch's future earnings. The building one large room, well insulated, with 4 small dormitory rooms attached. The students' families within a day's ride, 7 to 15 children boarding Monday through Friday, home on weekends. The teacher, Eleanor. "I'd be coming home every night," she said one evening, looking at the diagrams they'd covered in pencil marks and revisions. "Yes," Eli said. "And teaching a real school." "Yes. And you'd be running the ranch." "Same as always." She looked at the paper. "What made you think of this?" she said. "You had this idea before. Why does it feel different now?" Eli thought about how to answer. "Because before," he said, "I was thinking about what I wanted. About you being here. About the cabin being full." He paused. "But watching you in that schoolroom in Cheyenne, watching you teach those 13 children and write about the one who wrote about 7 fingers, I understood that the school isn't something you do in addition to your life. It is your life. As much as this ranch is mine." He looked at her. "So we build both, in the same place." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "I want to negotiate one thing," she said. "All right. The dormitory children will take their meals with us," she said. "Not separately, with us, at our table, as part of our household." Eli blinked. "You want to feed a dozen children at our table every weeknight," he said. "Yes. That's what a school feels like," she said. "Not a building children go to, a place they belong." He looked at her. "All right," he said. She picked up the pencil and started writing again. He watched her for a moment, this woman who had crossed a country to meet him, who had fought with him about coffee cups and blizzards and the shape of a life, who was now sketching, with rapid and precise strokes, the school they were going to build together. He thought about the bunkhouse, the blank page, the name in the newspaper. He thought everything. He thought yes. They returned to the ranch in April, Eli with his arms still in a sling that he resented but wore without argument, because Eleanor had said exactly the right number of words about it, and began. Building the schoolhouse took 2 years. Not because they lacked determination, because they lacked money as expected, and because determination alone doesn't mill lumber or fire bricks or install windows that don't let the Wyoming winter through the gaps. They built it the way Eleanor had described Henry Marsh's father, 7 fingers at a time, steadily, with whatever was available, never gambling on what they couldn't afford to lose. Eli sold 2 horses. Eleanor contributed everything she'd saved from the Cheyenne school position. They borrowed against the next year's cattle sales from the boss, who agreed with the particular expressionlessness. That meant he thought it was a good idea and didn't want to appear sentimental about it. Tommy became the de facto construction crew on weekends and evenings. Fletcher helped when he could. Ruth, who had spent the better part of 4 years expressing skepticism about Eli's various decisions, arrived one Saturday with a set of proper carpentry tools and didn't explain why. "You know how to use those?" Eli asked. "My father was a builder," Ruth said. "You never mentioned that." "You never asked." He stayed every weekend for 3 months. Eleanor taught in the cabin through the winter of 1887, and into the spring of 1888, her 5 original students and 2 new ones from a family that had claimed land 6 miles north. She taught reading and arithmetic and history and geography. And in the evenings, she planned the curriculum for the school she was building. The real one, the one with proper walls and a real chalkboard, and enough space for the children to exist in without being conscious of each other's breathing. The framing went up in June of 1887. The walls in September. The roof, the hardest part and the most expensive, took until November. And they ran out of proper materials halfway through and had to improvise with what the land provided, which resulted in a section of the roof that was slightly different from the rest and would remain slightly different for the next 30 years, becoming eventually a distinctive feature that students would describe to their own children as the place where the schoolhouse had its own idea about things. The first dormitory room that was finished in January of 1888, the second in Barsko, the third and fourth by June. Eleanor walked through the finished building on a Sunday afternoon in July with the particular silence of someone taking inventory of a thing they had imagined for a very long time and are now seeing for the first time as real. Eli stood in the doorway and watched her. She ran her hand along the chalkboard, stood at the teacher's desk, a solid thing made from the same wood as the shelves in the cabin by the same hands. Went to the windows, 4 of them south-facing, to catch the light and looked out at the ranch and the plains beyond. "It's ours," she said. "It is." She turned. In the afternoon light of the building, they had spent 2 years, and every dollar they had, creating Eli Crawford, looked like someone who had arrived somewhere they had been trying to get to for a very long time. "You built this for me," she said. "We built it for both of us," he said, "and for anyone who comes to it." She came to him. He held her in the doorway of the school in the July light and thought that this was the thing the letters had been pointing toward all along. Not the wedding on the porch, not the first night in the cabin, not any of the specific moments he'd imagined and rehearsed. This, the building, the work, the thing made out of 2 people's best intentions and all the patience they had and all the money they didn't. The first student arrived in September of 1888, a boy named Michael from the Henderson family, 10 years old, solemn-faced, carrying a clean slate and a lunch pail, and the general air of someone who had been prepared for this by extensive parental briefing. He shook Eleanor's hand formally. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "my mother says to tell you she's grateful." "Your mother is very kind," Eleanor said. "Are you ready to work?" He looked slightly startled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Good," she said. "Sit down." By October, there were 7 students. By the following spring, 11. By 1890, 16, too many for the original building, which prompted Eli to add a second room, which prompted the arrival of 4 more students, which prompted the conversation that had been circling them quietly for 2 years. They were in bed when Eleanor brought it up. Not fighting, not in crisis, just the 2 of them in the dark, the ranch sounds outside the window, the particular ease of people who have learned to be still together. "I'm late," she said. Eli was very still for a moment. "How late?" he said. 3 weeks. He turned toward her in the dark. "Eleanor." "I know," she said. "I know. I'm 35 years old, Eli. Women have children at 35. But I want you to know that I understand what it means. The school will have to—" "Eleanor," he said again more quietly. She stopped. "Are you happy?" he said. In the dark, she was quiet for a long moment. "Terrified," she said. "And yes." He found her hand. "Then that's the only thing," he said. She held his hand in the dark. "I cried when I figured it out," she said. "Both kinds of crying. The scared kind and the other kind." "The other kind?" "The kind when something you didn't let yourself want is happening anyway." He thought about that. "I know that kind," he said. She laughed softly. "I know you do." Their daughter was born in May of 1891 during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power to the main house and left the midwife working by lamplight with the particular calm competence of a woman who had done this in worse conditions. Eleanor labored for 11 hours. Eli paced the porch for 11 hours with Tommy beside him for moral support, and when the baby's cry finally cut through the sound of the rain, both of them stood very still and listened to it. "That's her," Tommy said. "Yes," Eli said. The word came out strange, like it had traveled from a long way away. He went inside and the midwife put the baby in his arms, and he stood in the lamplight, holding the small, wrinkled, furiously alive person who was half Eleanor and half him, and all herself, and felt something happen to him that he had no words for. "She's perfect," he said. "She's very loud," Eleanor said from the bed. She was exhausted visibly, completely, and she was smiling with the brightness of someone who has just done something enormous. "She's ours," Eli said. "Yes," Eleanor said, "she is." They named her Clara for Eli's sister in Missouri, and she arrived in the world already determined, a fact that became apparent within the first week and never changed. She slept when she decided to sleep, ate when she decided to eat, regarded the world around her with an expression of interested assessment that Eleanor recognized and Eli found deeply familiar. "She has your eyes," Eleanor said. "She has your stubbornness," Eli said. "That's not stubbornness," Eleanor said. "That's clarity." "Those are different things." "Completely." Clara grew. The school grew. The ranch grew slowly, carefully, without the gambles Eli had never been willing to take. By 1895, they had a second building, a second dormitory wing, 22 students, and a reputation that extended well beyond the county. Families moved to the area specifically because of the Crawford School. Eli found this both gratifying and faintly alarming. "We're going to need more teachers," Eleanor said one evening, looking at the list of applications for the following year. "Do you know any?" Eli said. "As a matter of fact," she said, and looked up from the list with an expression he recognized as the precursor to a proposal of some significant scope. "I've been corresponding with a woman in Denver who graduated from the normal school last spring and can't find a position. Her name is Margaret Bell. She taught for 2 years in Missouri and is looking for something with more." Eleanor paused, searching for the word. "Substance." "Tell her about the roof section," Eli suggested. "The distinct architectural feature," Eleanor said, "is not the selling point I'd lead with. It adds character. It adds draft in February." He almost laughed. "Write to her," he said. Eleanor did. Margaret Bell arrived in September, 26 years old, competent, direct, and delighted to find herself in a school that had been built board by the people who ran it. She took over the younger students. Eleanor expanded to include a more advanced curriculum for the older ones. That year, for the first time since the school opened, Eli came home in the evenings to find Eleanor sitting still. Not the tense, frustrated stillness of the early months. A different kind settled, satisfied. The stillness of someone who has done enough and knows it and is not afraid of the quiet. He sat beside her on the porch one evening in October, Clara playing in the yard with a rope and a considerable amount of creative initiative, the school building visible at the edge of the property, the mountains purple in the distance. "Do you remember," he said, "the first letter I wrote you?" Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "Holes punched through black cloth," she said. "Yes, I remember. I wrote it because I didn't know who else to tell," he said. "That's all it was. Someone to tell about the stars." She was quiet for a moment. "And now," she said. He looked at Clara, dragging a rope through the dust with the determined purposefulness of a child who has invented a game and is invested in its internal logic. "Now I have too much to tell," he said. "I don't know where to start." Eleanor lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him. "Start anywhere," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at her. She was exactly who she'd said she was in her letters, plain, practical. 30 years old and showing it, which meant 40 now, and showing that too with lines around her eyes and gray at her temples, in the hands of a woman who had worked consistently at things that mattered. She was exactly who he'd imagined. She was entirely different from who he'd imagined. Both things were true. Both things had always been true from the moment she'd stepped off the train. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes, thank you," he said, for writing back. She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, for not stopping. Clara dragged her rope through the yard. The mountains held their color. The school building stood at the edge of the property like the answer to a question Eli had started asking before he fully understood what he was asking. He put his arm around Eleanor. She leaned into it. The stars were coming out above the plains, the same stars he'd written about, the same sky, the same holes in the black cloth that had started everything. He thought I would do it again. He thought all of it. The year 1896 brought a letter from Clara Crawford, Eli's sister in Missouri. He hadn't heard from her in almost 4 years. The last letter had been brief and formal, the kind she sent twice a year the way a person files a report fulfilling an obligation without much investment. This one was different, longer, written, he thought, by someone who had been building up to it for a while. She was widowed, the letter said. Her husband had died of pneumonia the previous winter, and she had a son, 9 years old, named after their father, and she wrote this simply, without drama, not managing particularly well. Eli read the letter twice. Then he handed it to Eleanor. She read it once, set it down, and said, "Write to her. Tell her what he said. Tell her she's welcome here," Eleanor said. "The school has a room. She can teach if she wants to, or not if she doesn't, but tell her she's welcome." He looked at her. "You've never met her," he said. "You've been writing to me for 7 years," she said. "I learned something about letters." He wrote to Clara that evening. She arrived in the spring of 1897, thin, careful moving, with the watchful eyes of a person who had been bracing for difficulty for so long it had become a physical habit. Her son William was 10 by then, quite observant, and the first thing he did when he arrived was walk to the school building and press his face against the window to look inside. "He'll be a student," Eleanor told Eli that night. "Obviously," Eli said. William became, within the first month, the best reader Eleanor had in the school. He sat in the front row and answered questions before she finished asking them, and corrected with polite precision 2 errors in the arithmetic textbook that had apparently gone unnoticed for years. "Where did he learn this?" Eleanor asked Clara. "He taught himself," Clara said, "from whatever he could find." She paused. "He's like Eli was, I think, when Eli was small." Eleanor looked at the boy across the schoolroom, bent over a slate, completely absorbed. "Yes," she said, "I can see that." Clara stayed. Not as a teacher, she tried it for a week and concluded that she respected teachers the way she respected people who could juggle as a skill she recognized as valuable and had no intention of developing personally, but as the person who ran the practical operations of the school. The meals, the dormitory, the laundry, the supply, ordering the 100 small logistical problems that kept arising as the school grew. She was, it turned out, extraordinarily good at it. "You should have been a general," Eleanor told her. "I thought about it," Clara said. They weren't hiring. The school reached 30 students in 1900. Eleanor hired a third teacher, a young man fresh from the university in Denver, who was slightly startled by the remoteness of the location and completely won over by the quality of the students within the first week. "These children read," he said, with the tone of someone who has discovered this is not universally true. "Yes," Eleanor said, "that's the point." The year 1900 also brought Clara Crawford back to something approaching herself. The watchfulness faded slowly over 18 months of regular meals and purposeful work, and the company of a brother who remembered her as a child and treated her accordingly, not with the delicacy of someone managing a fragile person, but with the uncomplicated assumption that she was capable and competent and would figure things out. She did. She started writing letters too eventually, not to strangers, to other school administrators in the territory about supply chains and curriculum materials, and the particular challenges of educating children in remote areas. The letters were brisk and precise and effective. She got results. "She's better at correspondence than you are," Eleanor told Eli. "I know," he said, not particularly bothered. "Is that not a small blow to your pride?" "My letters were always functional," he said. "The content was the point, not the prose." Eleanor looked at him. "Your letters," she said, "were not functional. Your letters were—" She stopped. "Were what?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "They were the kind of letters," she said carefully, "that a person keeps in a box under her bed and reads on bad nights for 12 years. Eli looked at her. "7, he said. "I kept reading them," she said, "after I came, when things were hard, in the early months when I wasn't sure we were going to work." She met his eyes. "I would take them out and read them, to remember what you were like before I knew you, before things got real." "Was that useful?" he said. "It reminded me," she said, "that the man I married was the man who noticed the stars." He was quiet. "And then I'd come to bed and see you were there, and the practical was better," she said, "but the reminder was useful." He thought about that for a while. That night, for the first time in years, he wrote a letter. Not to Eleanor, she was in the bed beside him. He wrote it anyway. Not because she needed to receive it, but because some things he had learned existed differently when you wrote them down, were more real, had sharper edges. He wrote about the school, about Clara's son William, who would probably end up at a university somewhere, which meant that 2 people who had grown up with nothing had produced between them a child who would grow up with everything. He wrote about the mountains at evening and the sound of 30 children working at their slates, and the way the school building looked from the porch at dusk when the light came through the south-facing windows, and the whole structure seemed to be holding something warm inside it. He wrote about Eleanor sleeping beside him, about what it meant to have spent 7 years reaching towards someone, and then to have spent another decade learning that the reaching had not been towards something imaginary, that the woman he had invented in his mind, Sunday by Sunday, was real, was more than real was the specific, difficult, extraordinary person beside him who snored slightly and moved his coffee cups and taught 30 children to think and had crossed a country on faith and had never not once been anything less than who she said she was. He wrote, "I would write every letter again." He wrote, "I would wait every Sunday again." He wrote, "All of it was the price of this and all of it was worth it." He folded the letter, put it in the box with her others. In the morning, she found it. She stood at the table reading it with her coffee cooling beside her, and he watched her face do the thing it did when something got through the small, tightening around the eyes that meant it was real, that it had landed somewhere it mattered. She set the letter down. "You wrote to me," she said. "Yes, while I was sleeping 3 feet away." "That's right." She looked at him. "You are impossible," she said. "Persistent," he said. She took her coffee to the window and stood looking at the school building. "Build me another room," she said. "I need it for next year." "I already ordered the lumber," he said. She turned. He was looking at her with the particular expression she had learned across 15 years meant he was exactly where he meant to be. "Of course you did," she said. She went to school. He went to work. Outside, the ranch spread itself in every direction under a sky full of September light, and the school building stood at the edge of it like a claim staked in the ground. "This is ours. This is what we made. This is what a life can be when two people stop being afraid of it." The new room was finished by spring, then another wing 2 years after that, then a proper outhouse and a hand pump for water, and a small infirmary room that Eleanor had insisted on and that Eli had resisted on cost grounds, until a student broke his arm in the yard and had to be driven 50 miles to the nearest doctor, after which the infirmary was completed in 3 weeks without further discussion. The Crawford School grew the way things grow in Wyoming, slowly at first, against resistance, and then all at once, as though the land itself had been waiting for someone to plant something worth keeping. By 1902, there were 38 students. By 1905, 44. Families were moving to the county with the school as a stated reason. A cattle buyer from Casper told Eli at the spring sale that he'd heard about the Crawford place from 3 separate ranchers who'd sent their children there, and that all 3 had said the same thing. It wasn't just a school. It was the kind of place that changed what a child thought was possible. Eli had no good response to that. He went home and told Eleanor. She was at her desk writing lesson plans in the methodical way she approached all of her work, completely absorbed, completely efficient, the pen moving fast across the page. "That's gratifying," she said without looking up. "That's all," he said. She looked up. "Would you prefer I perform more enthusiasm?" "No," he said. "But it's a significant thing," what he said. Eleanor set down her pen. "When I was teaching in Philadelphia," she said, "there was a boy in my class who came to school every day without breakfast because his family couldn't afford it. Every day, for 2 years. He was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and he was so hungry by noon that he couldn't hold a thought together. I used to bring extra bread." She paused. "His name was Edgar. I've thought about Edgar 3 or 4 times a year for 15 years. I don't know what happened to him." Eli was quiet. "The point," Eleanor said, "is that what we build here isn't about reputation. It's about the Edgars." She picked up her pen. "If some of them become the kind of people that cattle buyers mention in conversation, that's a fine outcome. But it's not the point." He looked at her for a long moment. "You never stop, do you?" he said. She glanced up. "Stop what?" "Being exactly who you are." She held his gaze for a moment. "Neither do you," she said, and went back to her lesson plans. Their son James was born in 1902, 11 years after Clara, as though he had decided to give everyone time to get used to the first child before adding himself to the arrangement. He was a different kind of person from his sister entirely. Where Clara had announced herself from infancy, James arrived quietly and observed. He watched his mother teach. He watched his father work. He spent a great deal of time in the company of William Clara Crawford's son, now 15 and already taller than Eli, absorbing apparently as much as he could of a person who thought at twice the speed of everyone around him. "Your nephew is going to the university," Eleanor told Eli one evening in 1903. "I know," Eli said. "He told me last week." "He didn't tell me. He was worried you'd be upset, that we'd lose him." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "We won't lose him. Education doesn't take people away from where they come from. It gives them a reason to come back." She paused. "Usually." William went to the University of Wyoming in 1904, one of the first students from the rural county to do so. He studied engineering and mathematics. He wrote long, detailed letters home that he addressed to the household collectively and that somehow always managed to be specifically relevant to each person who read them. He came back every summer for the ranch work with calluses developing on hands that had also developed the ink stains of someone who worked at a desk. "You're going to have to choose," Eli told him one summer evening, "between what," William said, "between the desk and the land." William looked at the ranch, at the school building, at his hands. "Why?" he said. Eli thought about it. "Because most men have to," he said. "You didn't," William said. Eli blinked. "I run a ranch," he said. "You built a school," William said. "You built this." He gestured at everything, the buildings, the students visible through the windows, the whole enterprise that had grown out of a one-room cabin and two people's best intentions. "You did both, you and Aunt Eleanor." A pause. "I'm going to do both." He did. He graduated in 1908, came home and went to work on the ranch in the mornings, in the school teaching mathematics and applied science in the afternoons, and at night on a set of problems he was working through by correspondence with an engineering firm in Denver that had taken an interest in his ideas about water management in arid territories. Clara watched this with the complicated pride of a parent who has produced something that operates largely beyond her range. "He frightens me a little," she told Eleanor. "He's exceptional," Eleanor said. "I know that, it's what I mean." "Clara," Eleanor said, "you raised him alone in poverty after your husband died, and you brought him here and gave him this. You should be frightened. You made something that big." Clara was quiet. "You sound like Eli," she said. "That's the second time someone has said that to me this week," Eleanor said. "I'm not sure how to feel about it." The years accumulated. Clara, now well into her 40s, had become the indispensable core of the school's operations. She knew where everything was, who was behind on their fees, which family needed a quiet word about their son's behavior, and which problems could wait until morning and which could not. She had also, somewhere in the middle of it all, started corresponding with a widower in Laramie who ran a feed operation and who wrote Eli noticed when he occasionally saw the letters with the particular careful attention of a man who understood that what he said was being weighed. "Are you going to tell me about him?" Eli asked her one evening. Clara looked at him over her coffee cup. "His name is Robert," she said. And he's a sensible man who doesn't require much entertainment and appreciates an organized person." "That sounds exactly like what you'd say about a man you actually liked." She almost smiled. "His son is 11. He needs a mother who knows how to manage things." "Clara," Eli said. She set down her cup. The careful movement of a person who has been practicing not letting things show. "I like him," she said, "more than I expected to like anyone again." "Is that what you wanted to hear?" "Yes," Eli said. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." She married Robert Dolan in 1909, a small ceremony in the school because, as she said, the main house was too small and the school was the place that mattered. Eleanor cried at the ceremony, which surprised everyone, including Eleanor. "You never cry at weddings," Eli said afterward. "I cry at the appropriate weddings," Eleanor said, composing herself with the efficiency she applied to everything. "That was the appropriate kind." The school reached 50 students the year Clara left to move to Laramie. It felt like a significant threshold, some invisible line between a family's project and a public institution. Eleanor marked it by hiring a fourth teacher, rewriting the curriculum from the ground up, and ordering a new set of geography maps that covered the entire Western Hemisphere. 50, Eli said. 51, Eleanor said. "The Patton girl starts Monday." "Do you remember when we had Cheyenne?" 6, she said. "I had 6 when Mrs. Alderson suggested Cheyenne." He looked at her. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Not going to Cheyenne, building here instead." Eleanor considered this with the seriousness she gave to questions that deserved it. "I regret the 2 years of distance," she said. "I don't regret what came after." She paused. "You?" "No," he said. She looked out the window at the school building, now substantially larger than the original, with a proper covered porch and 4 sets of windows facing south. "I think about the students I didn't teach," she said quietly. "The ones from those years when I was waiting for the school to be built. I wonder about some of them." "You can't teach them all," he said. "No," she turned back from the window. "But I can teach the ones in front of me." The following year, Clara's daughter was born. She and Robert named her Eleanor, which produced from the school's founder exactly 3 seconds of composed reaction before she had to excuse herself from the room to cry somewhere private. "She named her after you," Eli said, finding Eleanor in the kitchen garden 10 minutes later. "I'm aware," Eleanor said. She was crouching between the tomato plants with her back to him, doing something with the soil that was clearly displacement activity. "You could come back inside." "I will in a moment." He stood and waited. After a while, she stood up and turned around, and her face was composed again, in the way it got when she had felt something very strongly and decided to carry it with dignity. Clara named her daughter after me, Eleanor said. Yes, Eli said. She stopped. Yes, he said again. She came and stood beside him among the tomato plants. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. What? The box, she said. The letters. The whole time I was reading them, I thought the story was about a man who wrote letters. But it wasn't. It was about what we were building toward without knowing it. All those years. She looked at the school building. This is what the letters were for. He thought about that. Maybe, he said. Or maybe the letters were for themselves, and this is what happened next. She leaned her shoulder against his. Both, she said. It's both. The year 1910 arrived, and with it the knowledge that time was passing in the specific way it does when you are busy enough not to notice it until you look up. Eli was 43. Eleanor was 48. Clara, their daughter, was 19 and had her mother's directness and her father's patience, and was, according to Eleanor, going to be an exceptional teacher if she'd stop being distracted by the Henderson boy who was 21 and had inherited his father's good sense and would, according to Eli, be a very decent son-in-law once Clara made up her mind about it. She doesn't know she's made up her mind yet, Eleanor said. You think she has? She's been made up for 3 years, Eleanor said. She's just being thorough. She was right. Clara and Daniel Henderson announced their engagement at the end of that year, a fact that Clara presented to her parents as a practical decision that happened to also be an emotional one, which was the Crawford way of doing things, and which Eli recognized from inside his own history. He's a good man, Eli said. I know that, Clara said with the mild impatience of someone who had in fact been thorough. James, now 8, served as ring bearer at the wedding, a role he performed with the grave concentration he applied to everything. He spent the reception asking William questions about engineering at a rate that suggested he had prepared an extensive list in advance. William, at 24, was the most interesting person Eli knew. Not the most comfortable. Interesting and comfortable were, in his experience, rarely the same thing, but the most genuinely interesting. He thought in directions that Eli couldn't follow, about problems that didn't yet exist, with a confidence in his own conclusions that came not from arrogance, but from the specific kind of certainty that thorough people develop after they have been right about enough things to trust the process. He was also, Eli had noticed in the past year, writing letters to a woman in Denver, a teacher, as it happened, someone who had attended the same university and was now running a one-room school in a mining community. Are you going to tell me about her? Eli asked him in the same words he'd once used with Clara. William looked at him. Her name is Abigail, he said. She teaches science and mathematics. She grew up on a ranch in Colorado. He paused. She is the most precise person I have ever met. That sounds like a compliment, Eli said. It's the highest compliment I know, William said. Eli thought about Eleanor marking errors in textbooks and moving his coffee cups and planning curriculum in her sleep. Yes, he said, it is. William married Abigail in 1912. They settled in Laramie, where William was working with the engineering firm, and Abigail had found a teaching position at the new high school. They came back to the Crawford Ranch every summer for the cattle work, and Abigail helped Eleanor with the school curriculum during those visits with the efficiency of someone who understood both the theory and the practice of education. The Crawford School had 60 students by then, 2 new teachers, a library that Eleanor had been building for 10 years, 1 volume at a time. Time passed. James Crawford grew up in the particular way of children who are surrounded by interesting people, absorbing, synthesizing, producing results that surprised everyone except the people who had been watching closely. He had his mother's precision and his father's patience, and a quality all his own, the ability to work alongside anyone, regardless of the difficulty, without complaint and without drama. He was, Eli thought, the most reliable person he had ever known, which was saying something on a cattle ranch where reliability was the primary currency. At 16, James was doing the work of a grown hand. At 18, he was running the North Pasture rotation without supervision. At 20, he sat across from Eli at the kitchen table and said without preamble that he intended to take over the ranch operation gradually as Eli's capacity for the physical work decreased. My capacity is fine, Eli said. I know it is, James said. But in 5 years, it will be less fine, and in 10 years, it will be considerably less fine. And I'd rather make the transition while you can still teach me things I don't know than after. Eli looked at him. Your mother coached you on that speech, he said. She helped me identify the key points, James said. The sentiment is mine. He was 20, and he sounded 40, and Eli thought, yes. This is what you get when you build something that lasts. Children who understand what they're inheriting and why it matters. All right, Eli said, we'll start Monday. The years from 1915 to 1920 had the quality of deep work, the kind that doesn't seem dramatic while you're in it and only reveals its significance in retrospect. The ranch grew in the careful, deliberate way Eli had always managed it. The school grew in the careful, deliberate way Eleanor had always managed it. James learned the ranch the way William had learned engineering completely, and without shortcuts, with the understanding that there were no shortcuts worth taking. Clara, their daughter, and Daniel had 3 children. Eleanor and Laramie had 2. The Crawford household at any given Sunday dinner could contain upward of 12 people across 3 generations, which produced a noise level that the school building could contain more comfortably than the main house, but which Eleanor refused to move to the school because she said family meals belonged in a home. It's too loud in here, Eli said one Sunday in 1918 over the crossfire of 3 simultaneous conversations and a child who was crying for a reason that was unclear but apparently urgent. Yes, Eleanor said. She was passing the breadbasket with one hand and smoothing James's youngest daughter's hair with the other. Isn't it wonderful? He looked at her. She looked back the direct, unhidden attention she'd brought to everything since she stepped off the train 30 years ago. Yes, he said, it is. In 1920, William and Abigail moved back to the county. The engineering work had taken William to several territories over the years, but a project close to home, a water management system he'd designed for the county irrigation board, had brought them back. Abigail joined the Crawford School as its lead mathematics teacher. William consulted on the technical aspects of the new building addition Eleanor had been planning for 3 years. You designed a better roof section, Eleanor told him, looking at the plans. The existing one has a structural weakness on the northwest corner, William said. The existing one has character, Eli said. They both looked at him. It's been leaking for 8 years, Eleanor said. Characterful leak, Eli said. The new addition was built in 1921. The leaking section was repaired in the process, and if the school lost some character in the operation, it gained considerably in wintertime habitability, which Eleanor argued was the superior trade. The school reached 80 students the following year. Eleanor was 58 by then, still teaching, still planning curriculum in the evenings, still moving Eli's coffee cups, and then when he moved them back, accepting this without comment as part of the long negotiation of shared space. That was what a good marriage actually consisted of. She was, he thought, more herself at 58 than she had been at 30, more settled in her own precision, more comfortable with her own certainty. The gray at her temples was now entirely silver, and she wore it without apology. And she was, he thought this with the particular clarity that only comes after enough time, more beautiful than the day she arrived. He told her this one evening on the porch. She looked at him with the expression she used when she suspected he was about to say something she would need to respond to carefully. That's not the word I'd use, she said. What word would you use? She thought about it. Settled, she said. I've always felt, even as a child, I think like I was slightly to the left of where I was supposed to be. Like I was approximating my own life. She looked at the school. Here I'm not approximating. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She paused. That probably shows. He looked at her. It does, he said. That's what I mean. She was quiet for a moment. You're exactly where you're supposed to be too, she said. If that's useful information. It is, he said. It always is. They sat on the porch in the September evening. The school building was quiet now, students settled in the dormitory, lamps out. James was in the barn doing the last check. 2 of Clara's grandchildren were staying the week, and their voices drifted out from the main house window with the particular quality of children who are supposed to be asleep and are not. Eli thought about the bunkhouse, the wind, the blank page, the name in a newspaper column that someone had left at the supply depot. He thought about 35 years of mornings that started with Eleanor already at her desk and ended with her always reading before sleep. He thought I would do all of it again, twice. He reached over and took her hand. She didn't look at him. She was watching the stars come out above the plains, the same stars, the same sky, the same holes punched through the black cloth that had started everything. You're thinking about the first letter, she said. How did you know? You get a particular look, she said. Like you're calculating something, and the answer keeps coming out the same. It does, he said. She squeezed his hand. The porch held them. The stars held their light. The school building stood at the edge of the property like a claim staked in the ground, and the ranch stretched out and around them in every direction. And 35 years of choosing each other every day through blizzards and distance and the ordinary accumulation of a life that had turned out to be something neither of them had been able to imagine from the beginning. It was better, Eli thought, than anything he'd imagined. It was harder, too. Both things were true. Both things had always been true. And in 1925, something shifted. Eleanor had been coughing since October. Not badly at first, the kind of cough that settled in with the cold weather and was expected to leave with the spring. But spring came and the cough didn't leave, and by June it had become a different kind of cough. Deeper, more persistent, the kind that woke her at night and that she tried to hide from Eli by turning away and keeping her breathing quiet, which didn't work, because he had been sleeping beside her for 33 years and he knew the exact sound of all her silences. "Eleanor," he said one morning in July. "It's nothing," she said. "Eleanor!" She looked at him. "It's probably nothing," she said. "You're going to see the doctor." "Eli, this week," he said. "James will drive you." She looked at him with the expression she used when she had already calculated the outcomes, and none of them were the ones she wanted to tell him about. "All right," she said. "This week." She went on a Thursday, came back on Friday. James drove and didn't say much on the way home, which told Eli everything he needed to know before Eleanor told him anything. She sat down at the kitchen table. He sat across from her. Between them, the table that didn't wobble, the one he'd bought 33 years ago, with his entire life savings, held the silence for a moment. "Pneumonia," she said, "or the beginning of it. The doctor thinks it's been developing since autumn. Can it be treated?" "He's optimistic," she said. The word carried the weight of someone who knows what the optimism costs. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I'm not ready," he said. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Neither am I," she said. "But Eli, look what we built." She looked at the window and the school beyond it and the ranch beyond that. "Look at what we did." "It's not enough," he said. "I need more time with you." "You've had me for 33 years, she said. Her voice was steady, the steady voice she used for things that required steadiness. "That's more than we ever thought we'd get. Remember standing on the platform, both of us terrified." He remembered. He tightened his hand around hers. "More," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "We'll fight it," she said. "I promise you we'll fight it." She did fight it. For the rest of the summer and into the fall, with the precise total commitment she brought to everything that mattered. Rest, treatment, the careful rationing of energy. She stepped back from some of the teaching, not all of it, not without a significant argument that James and Clara and Eli and William all lost, but some of it. Abigail took on more of the curriculum planning. The other teachers held more of the daily load. Eleanor, from her chair by the window or her position at the kitchen table, continued to run the school with the same precision she always had, just from a different angle. On her good days, she was in the schoolroom by noon. On her bad days, she graded papers from bed. There were more good days than anyone had dared to hope that autumn. The doctor revised his language upward. Eli allowed himself carefully to believe that this was going to be one of the things they got through together, the way they had gotten through everything together, not without cost, not without change, but through. November came. December. January, cold and clear. The cough returned in February. February came back the way it always did in Wyoming, without apology, without concession, with the flat, absolute authority of a season that understood it could not be argued with. Eleanor's cough returned harder. The doctor came out from Cheyenne this time, rather than waiting for her to make the trip. He was a different doctor from the one she'd seen in July, younger, more precise, with the manner of someone who had learned to give difficult information clearly and without decoration. He spoke with Eli in the kitchen afterward while Eleanor rested. "The pneumonia has come back more aggressively," he said. "Her lungs were compromised by last autumn's episode. This is harder to treat." Eli stood at the window with his back to the room. He had been standing there since the doctor came out of the bedroom. He could feel the winter through the glass. What do we do?" he said. "Rest, warmth. The medicines I'll leave." And the doctor paused. "She should not teach. Not this spring. Not until this is fully resolved." "She won't agree to that." "I know," the doctor said. "But the effort of teaching is costing her energy she needs for recovery. You'll have to be firm." Eli turned from the window. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "to be firm with Eleanor Crawford about what she is and isn't allowed to do." The doctor looked at him. "Yes," he said. "With respect," Eli said, "that's the second hardest thing anyone has ever asked me to do." "What's the first?" the doctor said. Eli thought about it. "Letting her go to Cheyenne," he said, 40 years ago. He delivered the doctor's verdict that evening. Eleanor received it in silence, which was worse than argument. "Eleanor," he said, "I heard you. The school will run without you this spring. Abigail has the curriculum. The other teachers know what they're doing. You taught them." She looked at the window. I know that, she said. Then what? I'm not afraid it won't run without me, she said. She turned to look at him, and her face had the expression she used for things she was saying exactly once and needed him to hear completely. I'm afraid that if I stop, I will. Run without me, I mean. A pause. I am most myself when I'm working. You are most yourself always, he said. She shook her head slightly. You see that because you love me. But Eli, the school is not separate from me. It's not something I do. She pressed a hand against her chest. It's part of the structure. He understood that. He understood it in the way you understand things that are true about someone else, because they are also true about you, because the ranch was the same for him, had always been the same, the work not separate from the worker, but woven through inseparable. Then we keep the structure, he said. You grade papers, you plan curriculum, you talk to the teachers every afternoon. You just don't stand in front of 40 students for 6 hours. She looked at him. That's a negotiation, she said. Everything's a negotiation, he said. That's what marriage is. Something moved across her face, complicated deep. The kind of thing that only happens in people who have lived long enough to know the weight of what they're feeling. All right, she said. That spring was different from every other spring Eli could remember. Not bad exactly, but careful in the way that things are careful when care is the only available strategy. Eleanor sat by the window in the mornings and planned lessons she gave to Abigail, who carried them into the schoolroom and taught them with the faithfulness of someone who understood what it meant to be trusted with someone else's best thinking. Students came to the house on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for small group sessions, 5 or 6 at a time, sitting around Eleanor's kitchen table while she talked them through mathematics or history or the grammar of the English language with the same patient precision she'd always had, just from a chair instead of a chalkboard. James managed the ranch with the quiet competence of a man who had been training for this responsibility his entire life and was not surprised to find it fitting him exactly. Clara's children came from Laramie for spring break and filled the house with the noise of a family that had been built over 30 years into something too large to fit quietly in any room. Eleanor presided from her chair by the window, directing conversations, settling disputes, asking the children questions that made them think harder than they wanted to, and looking Eli thought more alive on those days than she had in months. You love it when they're all here, he said one evening after the grandchildren had gone to bed. I love that there are so many of them, she said, that we made that. We made 2 of them, he said. They made the rest. We made the conditions, she said, for 2 children who could grow up and make people worth having at your table. She looked at him. That counts. He thought about the bunkhouse again, the blank page, the name in the newspaper. He thought none of this was inevitable. All of it was chosen. It counts, he said. She improved through April and May. By June, she was teaching again, not full days, not the same way, but in the schoolroom at the chalkboard, with the particular energy of someone who has been away from what they love and is grateful for the return. The doctor came back in August and used the word remission. Eli stood at the window when the doctor said it, the way he had stood at the window in February, and felt something complex and large moving through him. Not relief exactly, though there was relief in it, but something more like the aftermath of being braced for a long time and finally carefully allowed to ease. He did not ease entirely. You didn't after a thing like that winter. You kept a part of yourself alert in the way of a man who has learned that danger comes back. But the summer was good. They sat on the porch in the evenings. They watched the grandchildren running in the yard with the specific recklessness of children who don't know yet that some things are fragile. James and Daniel took turns with the ranch work and argued amicably about fence placement, the way men who respect each other argue about small things when they agree on all the large ones. William and Abigail drove out on Sundays, and William talked to Eli about the county water project, and Abigail talked to Eleanor about curriculum, and the conversations overlapped and went in 4 directions at once and produced consistently a noise level that the porch could barely contain. Eleanor laughed a lot that summer. Eli noticed it, filed it away the way he had always filed things he wanted to keep in the part of him that had been keeping things since a blank page on a Sunday night in a bunkhouse, since the first words he had put down for a woman who didn't know he existed. In September, she said, I want to do something. He looked up from the harness he was mending. What kind of something? The letters, she said. I want to organize them properly, into a book or something. All of them, yours and mine. He set down the harness. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because they're the beginning, she said, and the school is what we built. And I want there to be a record of how one led to the other, of what it looked like from the inside. He thought about it. All 364, he said. And my 52, she said. 416 letters, he said. That's a significant project. I'm aware, she said. I'm a school teacher. I plan things. He almost smiled. I'll build the box, he said. I'll write the introduction, she said. They spent the autumn of 1925 organizing letters. Eleanor at the table in the evenings reading 40 Years of Sundays in chronological order, making notes in the margins of a separate notebook about context and consequence, what she'd been doing when a particular letter arrived, what she'd been afraid of, what she'd understood, and what she'd gotten wrong. Eli read his own letters with the odd experience of meeting someone. He had been the 18-year-old in the bunkhouse, the 21-year-old in the blizzard, the 25-year-old who had almost stopped writing and then had written once more and changed everything. You were different then, Eleanor said one evening. Was I? Younger, she said, but not in the obvious way. You were more searching, like you hadn't settled into yourself yet. She looked at him. You're very settled now. So are you, he said. I know, she said. I like it. By December, the letters were organized. 416 of them in order, with Eleanor's careful notes and the introduction she had written 3 pages precise and unsparing that told the true story of a woman who had received 364 letters and had kept everyone and had been afraid to answer and had finally, on the other side of fear, gotten on a train. Eli read the introduction twice. This is honest, he said. That's the only way I know how to write, she said. I know, he said. I always knew. He put the box on the shelf. Outside, the Wyoming winter was settling in for its season, the long cold, the bright stars, the particular silence that had always been his companion out here, except that it wasn't a companion anymore. It was just a climate. The companion was at the table beside him, closing the notebook she'd been writing in, setting her pen down with the small, final click of someone who has finished a thing. There, she said. There, he agreed. She looked at him. He looked at her. They had spent 40 years looking at each other, and it had not gotten ordinary. He thought it probably never would. The winter of 1925 into 1926 was cold but survivable. Eleanor moved through it carefully, not timidly, not with the diminished caution of someone who has accepted limitation, but with the strategic precision of a woman who understood that some battles required managing your resources before committing them. She taught 3 days a week. The other 2 she planned and corresponded and met with teachers and reviewed student work and did in the kitchen of the main house. Essentially the same job she did in the schoolroom, minus the standing. Eli watched her do it. He watched the way she moved through a day, the efficiency, the focus, the specific kind of attention she gave to things that mattered to her. The way she read student essays with her pen in her hand and her lip pressed slightly between her teeth when she found something worth correcting. The way she looked out the window at the school building when she was thinking through a difficult problem and needed something stable to look at. He thought this is what love actually looks like. Not the first night in the cabin, not the proposal on the kitchen floor, not the wedding on the porch with Mrs. Alderson crying into her handkerchief. Those were the landmarks. But the actual terrain, the thing itself was this. The ordinary days, the particular silences, the accumulated knowledge of a person so complete that you could predict from the way she was sitting what she was going to say before she said it and still want to hear her say it. Spring came. The school opened its 38th year with 84 students and 5 teachers and a library that Eleanor had built volume by volume into one of the finest collections in the county. The cough did not come back. Not that spring, not that summer. The doctor in August used the word cleared. Eli sat with that word for a while. Then he went to find Eleanor. She was in the schoolroom after hours erasing the chalkboard with the methodical thoroughness she applied to the task every evening, fully erasing it so the morning started clean. He stood in the doorway. She turned. What? She said. He looked at her 59-years-old silver-haired chalk dust on her sleeve, standing in the building they had built together from borrowed money and the faith that something worth building was worth building. The doctor says you're cleared, he said. She lowered the eraser. Completely, she said. Completely. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set the eraser down on the chalk tray and crossed the room and held him the way she had held him on the train platform 41 years ago. The same quality of holding the same weight of all the things that couldn't be said efficiently pressed into the simple fact of her arms around him. He held her back. I was afraid, he said, into her hair. The way he had cried into her shoulder on the platform without planning to, without controlling it. I know, she said. I was afraid too. I wasn't ready, he said. I kept thinking there's more. There's so much more. There is, she said. There's tomorrow and the day after. He held on. She held on. Outside the school windows, the Wyoming summer was doing its late afternoon performance. The light going gold, the plains turning colors that had no names in ordinary language. The mountains going blue and then purple, and then the deep indigo that came just before dark. The same light as the day she arrived, the same sky. Eli thought, thank you. He didn't know who he was thanking. He had never known. But the feeling required an object, and in the absence of a better one, he let it go into the room, into the building, into the school they had made from two people's best intentions and 40 years of showing up. Eleanor pulled back and looked at him with her eyes bright. I have papers to grade, she said. He almost laughed. I know you do, he said. She picked up the eraser again, finished the chalkboard, then collected the stack of papers from her desk with the brisk authority of someone who has a task and intends to accomplish it before bed. I'll make supper, he said. Beans are in the pot, she said. I started them this morning. Of course you did, he said. She went past him through the doorway toward the main house. He stayed for a moment in the empty schoolroom, the chalkboard, cleaned the desks in their rows, the books on the shelves that Eleanor had built a shelf at a time, the geography maps on the walls that covered the world from here to places none of them had been. He thought about the first shelf, the cabin, the curtains with small blue flowers. He thought about all of it. Then he turned off the lamp and walked back to the house where Eleanor was already at the kitchen table with her pen in her hand and the stack of papers in front of her, grading with the focused intensity of someone who has always believed that what she was doing mattered because it did, and because she had always known it did, even when the evidence was slow to arrive. He made supper. She graded papers. Outside, the stars came out above the plains, the same stars he had written about to a stranger in a newspaper column. In 1885, the same holes punched through the same black cloth, unchanged in all the ways that mattered, and changed in all the ways that time changes everything, which is to say, they were the same stars and also completely different because now he was not alone under them, had not been alone under them for 41 years, would not be alone under them for whatever came after this. He set her bowl beside the papers. She put her pen down, looked at the bowl, then at him. Thank you, she said. Always, he said. They ate supper at the table that had started everything, or not started it, but been the table it came home to, the table that didn't wobble, the one he'd bought with his entire savings because a woman he'd never met had mentioned in a letter that she liked things that were solid. She was solid. He had not been wrong about that. He had not been wrong about any of it. The years after 1926 were by any measure the good years. Not easier than what came before easier was never the right word for a life built, the way theirs had been on land, that took everything you had and returned it transformed on work that required your entire self every day without exception, but settled in the way that good things settle when they have been properly built, when the foundation is right and the structure is sound and the years of maintenance have been honest. Eleanor turned 61, then 63. She taught with the same precision she always had, with the added quality of a person who has been teaching long enough to know which things matter and which things only seem to. She had become, without quite planning, to the person that other teachers in the county came to when they were struggling, not because she advertised herself as anything but, because word traveled in the way that word always travels about people who are genuinely good at what they do. Eli ran the ranch with James. More with James every year, not because he was failing, but because he was paying a different kind of attention now. The ranch needed James's energy. He had given it his own for 35 years, and some portion of him was ready to shift towards something that wasn't lifting and hauling and riding in all weather. He was not old exactly, but he was old enough to know the difference between necessary effort and unnecessary effort, and to stop confusing the two. He spent more time on the porch. He read more slowly still, the way he had always read, but with the benefit of Eleanor's 4 decades of book recommendations in the Crawford School's library, which meant there was never a shortage of things worth reading. He watched the grandchildren. Clara's grandchildren, who were now children themselves, the third generation of Crawfords and Hendersons and Dolans, growing up on the same land where Eli had spent 40 years building something for them without knowing exactly who they would be. They moved through the ranch and the school with the comfortable ownership of people who have never known a time before the thing they're inheriting. It was a particular kind of gift, Eli thought. Not the things you built, the people you built toward. In 1929, the economy broke, not just in Wyoming, everywhere, in the catastrophic way of things that are interconnected in ways no one fully understands until the connections start failing. Cattle prices collapsed. 3 families who had been sending students to the Crawford School for years couldn't pay the fees. 2 more families considered pulling their children out entirely. Eleanor called a meeting of the school board, which was not technically a formal board, more the assembled opinion of invested adults who cared about the outcome, and proposed a fee adjustment. No student leaves because of money, she said. That's the rule. It always was the rule. We adjust everything else before we adjust that. There was some discussion of the practical difficulties involved. Eleanor acknowledged the practical difficulties and proposed specific adjustments for each of them. The practical difficulties were resolved. You should have been a general, Clara told her years after originally making this observation when Eleanor recounted the meeting. You said that 30 years ago, Eleanor said. It's still true, Clara said. The school survived the Depression intact. Fewer resources, adjusted fees, teachers taking partial salaries for 2 years, the first time Abigail fully demonstrated the particular brand of practical idealism she'd brought to the school since her arrival. She managed the adjustment with the precision of a mathematician who has been asked to work with a smaller set of numbers and is genuinely not bothered. You like this, Eleanor said to her one evening reviewing the revised budget. I like problems that have solutions, Abigail said. The constraint makes the solution more interesting. Eleanor looked at her. You and William are very well matched, she said. I know, Abigail said without false modesty. It was the main reason I married him. The school came through the 1930s the way it came through everything. Not without cost, not unchanged, but fundamentally intact. Its reputation had become something real by then, the kind of reputation that outlives the people who built it. Students who had attended the Crawford School in the 1890s were now adults in their 40s and 50s, running businesses and farms and households, sending their own children back to the same school, the same land, the same institution, because they understood what it had done for them, and because understanding a gift is the prerequisite for passing it on. Eli turned 60 in 1927, 65 in 1932, 67 in 1934. Eleanor turned 69 in 1931, 70 in 1932. The numbers accumulated with the quiet insistence of arithmetic, not threatening, not frightening, but present in the way that all true things are present, requiring acknowledgement eventually. Eleanor's health held. Not perfectly, she had the cough again one winter, a bad season in 1933, that brought everyone to a careful attentiveness for 4 months before receding. But it held. She was not the woman who had stepped off the train in 1885, or the woman who had fought her way through the first Wyoming winter, or even the woman who had built the school from borrowed lumber and her own determination. She was something more than all of those, someone who contained all of those previous selves the way a river contains all the water that has passed through it, not holding it, but shaped by it. She slowed gradually, the way things slow gradually, not noticeably from one day to the next, only when you looked at the span. She stopped teaching full days in 1934, then 3 days a week, then 2. Not because she chose to stop, because her body was making choices her will had not approved, and she was practical enough to understand the distinction and adjust accordingly. Abigail took on most of the curriculum. Clara's granddaughter, the one named Eleanor, now 22, and teaching her first year, took on the younger students. The school moved into its 5th decade with the particular continuity of an institution that has put down deep enough roots that the people who founded it are no longer the only thing keeping it upright. This was, Eleanor said one evening, the point. To outlast us, she said. That was always the point. Not the building, not the curriculum. The fact that it doesn't need us anymore. It still needs you, Eli said. It can manage without me, she said. That's different. That's better. She was 71 that autumn, and she sat on the porch in the September light and watched the school building with the expression of someone taking stock of something they have finished. You look satisfied, Eli said. I am satisfied, she said. Is that allowed? I've been waiting for it for 50 years, he said. She looked at him. 49, she said. 49 years and some months, he agreed. She reached over and took his hand. Eli, she said. Yes. I'm tired, she said. He was very still. I know, he said. Not today, she said. Not this year, but I can feel it. The way you feel a winter coming. Something is settling in. He looked at their joined hands, at the school, at the mountains beyond, still snow-capped in September. Not yet, he said. No, she said, not yet. But I wanted to say it while it was just a weather feeling and not an emergency. She squeezed his hand, while we still had time to be calm about it. He held on. She held on back. The September light held them both on the porch of a ranch they had built together, in the shadow of a school that had outlasted its own necessity in the middle of a life that had turned out to be more than either of them had thought was possible on a Sunday night in a bunkhouse 49 years ago, when a young man had picked up a pen because the wind was loud and the walls were close, and somewhere in the world there was a person who might want to know that the stars were bright. He thought it was enough. He thought it was more than enough. He thought I would still do it all again. The winter of 1935 came hard and early. Eleanor managed it with her characteristic refusal to accommodate inconvenience. Extra blankets. The stove kept high, shorter walks outside, longer hours at the kitchen table with the papers she was still reviewing, because some habits are too deep to cut loose, even when the body is asking for rest. The cough came back in January. This time it was different. Not in the sound of it, that was the same deep pulling sound that had begun everything in 1925. Different in what it cost her. You could see it costing her. The specific expenditure of energy that each episode required, and the way the reserves came back slower afterward. The way she was tired in the evenings in a way she had never been tired before. The doctor came in February. He was gentle. He was precise. He used the word manage rather than cure, and Eli, who had been listening to words carefully for his entire adult life, heard the difference. Eleanor heard it too. She said nothing to Eli that evening. She went to bed early, which she never did, and when he came in, she was lying on her side facing the window, and he didn't know if she was sleeping or not. He lay beside her. After a while, she said, "Are you awake?" "Yes," he said. "Good." A pause of "I don't want to spend a lot of time on this part," she said. "Being afraid of it, I'd rather spend the time we have on the things that matter." "What things?" he said. "The school," she said. "The grandchildren. You." Another pause. "The grandchildren of the grandchildren, if we're lucky." "We've been lucky," he said. "Yes," she said, "we have." He reached for her hand in the dark. She gave it. "I'm not going to apologize," she said, "for the 7 years. I used to think I would spend the rest of my life apologizing for that, and I didn't, and I don't regret it. We talked ourselves through it, and we came out the other side." "We did," he said. "And the distance," she said, "the Cheyenne period, I used to think that was a failure, that I'd failed you somehow by needing to go." "You didn't fail me," he said. "I know that now," she said. "It took me a long time to know it, but it's one of the things I know clearly now. Clearly and completely." She was quiet for a moment. "I hope you know what you are to me." "Tell me," he said. She was quiet for a while, the way she was quiet when she was finding the exact words. "You are the reason I trusted the world," she said. "After my father, after all of that, I had decided very thoroughly that people were mostly disappointments, that the reliable ones were ordinary and the extraordinary ones couldn't be relied on." A pause. "And then I got a letter from a man in Wyoming who had never been anywhere and had never done anything impressive and who looked at the stars and thought of a stranger. He was very still. "You made me believe the extraordinary could also be reliable," she said. "That's not a small thing. That's everything." He held her hand in the dark and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I wrote the first letter because I was lonely." "I know," she said. "That's all it was. I was 18 and lonely and the walls were too close." "I know that too," she said. "That's why I kept it, because it was honest about something most people would have hidden." "I kept writing because I was afraid to stop," he said. "Because stopping felt like admitting that the silence was the answer." "It wasn't," she said. "No," he said, "it wasn't." They lay together in the dark for a long time. "Eli," she said. "Yes, I love you." "I know," he said. "I love you." "I know," she said. The winter passed. Spring came. Eleanor moved through it differently than she had moved through any previous spring, slower, more careful, with the particular attention of someone who is noticing things they want to remember. She sat in the schoolroom on days when she was strong enough and listened to Clara Crawford Dolan's granddaughter teach the younger students with the precise, patient voice that ran in the family, that Eleanor herself had trained into 3 generations of teachers without quite meaning to, just by being herself in front of people long enough for them to absorb it. She walked the ranch in the evenings with Eli. Not far, not fast, but she walked. She sat on the porch and watched the mountains. She read. She talked with Clara and James and William and Abigail and the children and grandchildren, and the young Eleanor, who was becoming unmistakably the teacher the school would center on when the time came, with the same clarity and exactness and genuine belief in the minds of young people that had defined the school since its founding. She organized the letterbox again. Not because it needed organizing, she had organized it in 1925, and it was still organized. But she went through the letters one more time slowly, The way you go through something you love in the knowledge that you are doing it for the last time and want to do it properly. She read them to Eli in the evenings that spring. Not all 416, they were both practical about what was and wasn't possible. But the first ones, his first letter, which still had the uncertain handwriting of a young man who had not quite grown into his own hand. Her first letter back 4 words in careful script. The ones from the spring of 1886 when they were exchanging cautious, hopeful letters across 2,000 miles. The letter in which she had said then, "We will be terrified together." And the ones from after. The letter he had written from her boarding house room while she slept 3 feet away. The letter she had written after the accident when she was calculating how to come home. The letter she had found in the box in the autumn of 1925 that he had written to her while she was sleeping in the bed beside him. She read that one twice. "You're still doing it," she said. "Writing letters," he said. "Noticing things," she said, "and finding a way to say them." He thought about it. "It's the only thing I ever learned to do well," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "You learn to wait. You learn to show up. You learn to let someone go when letting them go was what they needed. Those are things that almost nobody learns." A pause. The letters were just how you practice saying what you already knew. He held that. Outside the spring evenings, doing what spring evenings did in Wyoming, arriving late and bright and cold at the edges with the particular smell of snowmelt and new grass and the first wildflowers along the creek. "What do you want to do tomorrow?" he said. "Walk," she said. "If it's warm enough." "It will be," he said. "You don't know that." "I'm predicting," he said. 40 years of Wyoming spring. I can predict. She looked at him with the expression she had used for 49 years for things she found both exasperating and deeply true. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow we walk." They walked, not far to the school building and back, which was enough. Eleanor paused at the door of the school and put her hand on the door frame, the way she had put her hand on the railing of the porch 49 years ago the day she arrived. "Do you remember the first time I saw this?" she said. "You said it was ours," he said. "It is ours," she said, "even when we're not here anymore. Something that belonged to someone goes on belonging to them, I think, in the structure of it." He thought about that. "The roof section," he said. She laughed, the full, real laugh, not the polite version, the one that always arrived before she was ready for it and was better for it. "The distinct architectural features," she said. "Still providing character," he said. "Still providing draft," she said. "But yes." She put her hand down from the door frame, took his arm. They walked back to the house in the April light. Eleanor's last year was the spring and summer of 1937. She did not teach that year, not because she chose to stop, but because her body had finally made that choice conclusively, and she was too honest to fight it past the point where fighting was costing more than it returned. She was 74. She had been teaching for 50 years. The school had 112 students and 6 teachers and a library of 800 volumes and a reputation that extended across 3 states. She spent the spring at the kitchen table and on the porch. She read. Oh, she corresponded still with the precise, productive energy she had always brought to letters with teachers and administrators and parents and former students who were now running their own classrooms in their own towns. She talked with everyone who came through, and everyone came through, and the table was always full. Eli was always near. Not hovering, she had never tolerated hovering, and this was not the time to start, but near. Available. Present in the way he had been present for 49 years, reliably, quietly, without drama, without requiring acknowledgement. In September, she said, "I want to see the stars." He brought the rocking chairs out to the porch. The same chairs, the original one he'd bought, and the second one he'd built himself the following year because she needed a chair too, and the original had always been hers. They sat. Wyoming gave them a clear night. The stars were what they always were out here, too many to count, too bright to ignore the same holes punched through the same black cloth that a young man had once found words for in a bunkhouse because the walls were too close and the world felt too small. "It's still the most beautiful thing," Eleanor said. "Yes," Eli said. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything, the way you used to." He sat with that for a moment. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the first letter, about why I wrote it." "You were lonely," she said. "You said so." "I was," he said, "but it was more specific than that. I was afraid that my life would pass without leaving any mark, that I would work and sleep and die, and no one would know I had been here." He looked at the stars. "I think that's what the letters were really about. Not finding someone to love, though that's what they became. Just proof that I was here, that I noticed things." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You left a mark, she said. We left a mark, he said. She reached across the space between the chairs and took his hand. They sat under the stars for a long time. When the cold finally came into the evening, the particular mountain cold that arrived in September, without apology, he helped her inside. Made tea the way she'd always liked it, set it in front of her on the table. She looked at the cup, then at him. You still remember, she said. I told you, he said. I remember everything you ever wrote. She smiled, the real one, the one that arrived before she was ready, and drank her tea. Eleanor Crawford died in November of 1937, with her husband's hand in hers, in the letterbox on the shelf beside the bed, and every person she loved within reaching distance. She was 74 years old. She had been teaching for 50 years. She had crossed a country on faith and built a school from nothing, and raised 2 children and watched 3 generations of her students go out into the world carrying something she had given them that they would carry until they died. She had been for 49 years the answer to a letter. Eli read at her graveside, not a eulogy he had never been able to write. Eulogies had never seen the point of summarizing a person as though they could be summarized. Instead, he read her first letter back. 4 words. I am still here. Then his first letter to her. The whole thing from the beginning. The wind in the bunkhouse, the smell of tobacco and wet wool, the stars like holes punched through a black cloth. He read it to the assembled family, Clara and James and William and Abigail, and Clara's granddaughter Eleanor, who was already the teacher the school needed, and Daniel Henderson, who had been married to their Clara for 27 years, and showed it in the way of people who have been genuinely lucky, and all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and the teachers from the school and half the county, because Eleanor Crawford had touched too many lives for her funeral to be a private thing. He read the letter, and his voice was steady, not because he was not broken, because she would have wanted him steady, because she had told him once that showing up was the real thing, and the real thing was showing up here in this moment, and when reading this letter and letting everyone who needed to hear it hear what had started everything. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, she wrote back, and then she gave me 49 more years. I am not going to pretend that's not everything. It was everything. It still is. He lived for 12 years after. He ran the ranch with James. He sat on the porch in the evenings. He read slowly the way he had always read, working through the Crawford School Library 1 volume at a time, with the patient thoroughness of a man who had learned 50 years ago that things worth doing were worth doing properly. He wrote letters, not to Eleanor, she was not there to receive them, but to Clara and James and William and the grandchildren and Clara's granddaughter Eleanor, who was running the school now, with the same precision and the same absolute belief in the minds of young people, and the same quiet authority that announced itself not by performance, but by simple consistency. He wrote to former students, to the county school board, to ranchers he'd done business with for 40 years, to his sister Clara and Lorraine, who wrote back with the brisk practicality she'd had since she arrived here 30 years ago, thin and careful moving, and had slowly become herself. He was not lonely. He was alone, which was different, which he had learned to understand as different slowly across the years of learning the difference between solitude and isolation, between the absence of a person and the presence of everything they had left behind. Eleanor was everywhere, in the school which was hers as much as it had ever been more than it had ever been. In the students who were the students of people she had taught, in the books on the shelves of the library she had built, in the particular way that Clara's granddaughter Eleanor stood at the chalkboard, the same posture, the same patience, the same pen in hand for the margins. He was not alone. He had all of it. In 1949, at 72 years old, older than Eleanor had been older than he'd expected to get, Eli Crawford sat on the porch of the ranch house in September. The same porch, the same rocking chair, the same stars beginning to come out above the plains. He had a piece of paper in his lap. He had been sitting with it for an hour. Finally, he picked up the pen. My dearest Eleanor, I am old now, tired in the way that is different from exhaustion, the kind of tired that means something is finishing, not just resting. Our school stands 130 children this year. Clara's granddaughter runs it now, and she is you, exactly you, the precision and the patience and the belief, the way she looks at the window when she's thinking and watching her. I understand something I didn't understand when we were doing it, that the best thing we made wasn't the building or the curriculum or even the letters. It was the people who came through all of it and went on carrying something of it forward. The ranch thrives. James has made it something I couldn't have imagined from the original 40 acres. He has Alderson's gifts and better luck with winters. We have 11 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren as of June. They are loud and wild and specific, each one of them, not interchangeable, not general, each one stubbornly themselves. You would love them, you do love them, I think in whatever way love persists. I have been thinking this year about the first letter, about why I wrote it. I told you once it was because I was afraid of disappearing. That was true. But I think the truer thing is that I wrote it because somewhere inside an 18-year-old boy who had no one and nothing was a certainty unreasonable, unjustifiable, but absolute, that somewhere in the world there was a person worth reaching toward. You were that person. You were exactly that person. My life began the day you stepped off that train. It has not stopped being worth living for a single day since, wait for me, forever yours, Eli Crawford. He folded the letter, set it on the table beside him. The stars came out above the plains, the same stars, the same sky, the same uncountable bright points that had started everything one Sunday night in a bunkhouse when the wind was loud and the walls were too close and a young man had decided for reasons he couldn't fully explain to reach. He closed his eyes. The ranch was quiet. The school building was dark at this hour, but it would be full again in the morning, full of voices and slates and the patient, insistent work of a woman whose name was on the door and whose way of teaching had outlasted her by 12 years and was not done yet. Not nearly done. Eli Crawford died that night in his sleep in the rocking chair on the porch, with the letter on the table beside him and the stars still burning above the plains. They found both in the morning. They kept both. The letter went into the box with the others, 417 now, and the introduction Eleanor had written in 1925, and the careful notes she had made in the margins of her separate notebook. The ranch passed to James. The school passed to Clara's granddaughter, Eleanor, who ran it for another 20 years with the same precision and the same belief and the same look at the window when she was thinking through something difficult. The Crawfords donated the letter collection to the County Historical Society in 1972. People still came to read them, couples, mostly on anniversaries or at difficult junctures, the way people have always sought out stories of love that lasted when their own was tested. The guides always started with the same letter, the first one. The one about the wind and the bunkhouse and the tobacco and the wet wool and the stars that looked like holes punched through a black cloth. And then the last letter, the one found on the porch in September of 1949. And the 4 words that had changed everything between them. I am still here, not because the letters were unusual, because they were so completely profoundly ordinary, the reach of a lonely person toward a world that might be bigger than what they could see from where they stood. And because she had written back, and because writing back had been everything. The school still stands, the ranch still runs, and somewhere in the long chain of people who came through, both who sat in classrooms, built from borrowed money, and 2 people's best intentions, who worked land that had been worked for 50 years before them and would be worked for 50 more somewhere in that long chain. The story continues. Not because it was remarkable, because it was true, because they chose each other every day even when it was hard. Because love is not proved by grand gestures, but by constancy, by showing up, by building something, by writing one more letter into the silence, even when the silence seems to be all there is. It always answers eventually. You just have to keep writing long enough to hear it.